Hey guys, welcome to Fanfic Fanatics. So in today's video we are gonna see, what if Deku became captain of the Black Pearl movie. Before starting, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you are interested in MHA fanfictions. This story is Captain Sparrow Deku by Magireaderking. Now without wasting any more time, let's dive in. The sea smelled of salt and possibility. For most of the kids on the beach, it smelled of a fun day out. For Izuku Midoriya, it smelled of a dream he was told he could never have. The waves lapped at his bare feet, pulling away the sand from under his toes with a gentle, insistent tug. He wasn't watching the other kids play. His eyes were glued to the horizon, where the open sea met the impossibly blue sky. He was 14, and his heart was a shipwreck. Just a few months ago, All Might, his idol, had crushed his hopes with a single, devastating sentence: "You can't become a hero without a quirk." The words echoed in his head, a relentless tide of despair. His notebooks, once filled with vibrant, hopeful analysis, now felt like lead weights in his backpack. Still staring out there, Deku. A voice sneered, pulling him from his thoughts. Izuku flinched, turning to see Katsuki Bakugo swaggering toward him, his friends trailing behind him like loyal, albeit explosive, bodyguards. Bakugo's smirk was as sharp as a newly honed cutlass. "It's stupid," Bakugo continued, his hands crackling with tiny explosions. "There's nothing out there for a quirkless loser like you. No heroes, no villains, no treasure." I'm just thinking," Izuku stammered, clutching the straps of his worn backpack. "Thinking about what? How you're going to be a hero in the water. You'd just drown, Deku. You'd be fish food." Bakugo's laughter was a grating sound, like rocks grinding together. His friends snickered. Izuku's cheeks burned with shame, but his gaze drifted back to the horizon. There was something out there. He felt it in his bones. A life not defined by explosions or super strength, but by freedom. A life of adventure. Later that afternoon, a storm rolled in, a sudden fury of dark clouds and lashing rain. Most people ran for cover, but Izuku found himself drawn to the docks, the salty spray a balm on his bruised spirit. The boats bobbed violently, a chaotic dance on the churning water. That's when he saw it. Tied to the furthest, most weathered pier, was a small, ramshackle boat. It was a sorry sight, its sails tattered, its wood bleached and cracked by the sun. It looked like it was held together by hope and barnacles. On its bow, in faded, peeling letters, was a name: the Black Pearl. A wave of intense curiosity washed over him, a feeling so strong it pushed aside his usual anxiety. Ignoring the downpour, he made his way to the end of the pier, his feet slipping on the slick wood. As he got closer, he noticed a figure on the deck, hunched over and struggling with a frayed rope. The person stood up, revealing a wiry, older man with a long, graying beard and a worn, crimson bandana tied around his head. His eyes, though weary, held a mischievous glint, a spark of life that reminded Izuku of a storybook adventurer. He wore a patched-up coat and had a weathered compass hanging from his belt. Well, the man rasped, his voice a low rumble, "Look what the cat dragged in." A landlubber with a look in his eye like he's seen a kraken. "You lost, lad." Izuku shook his head, unable to tear his eyes from the man's compass. It was old and beautiful, with a brass casing and a needle that seemed to twitch erratically. I saw your boat, the Black Pearl." A crooked, toothy grin spread across the man's face. She's a beauty, isn't she? A bit rusty, a bit stubborn, but she's got character. Name's Captain Jack." Izuku's eyes widened. Captain Jack. The man's posture, his swagger, even his slightly unsteady gait, all seemed familiar. "The one and only," the man said with a flourish, tipping an imaginary hat. "And what's your name, scamp?" "Izuku. Izuku Midoriya." "Izuku," Captain Jack repeated, testing the name on his tongue. "You got a bit of the sea in your soul, lad. I can see it. The way you look at the horizon. The way you stand against the wind." He gestured to the tattered vessel. "She needs a crew. Someone who doesn't mind a bit of a challenge." Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs. He thought of Bakugo's cruel words. He thought of All Might's rejection. He looked at the captain, a strange feeling blooming in his chest. This man wasn't a hero. He wasn't a villain. He was something else entirely. A legend, perhaps. A free man. But I don't have a quirk, Izuku blurted out, the words a raw confession. Captain Jack let out a hearty, booming laugh that cut through the sound of the rain. A quirk? Bless your heart, lad. The sea doesn't care about quirks. The sea cares about wit, and courage, and a compass that points to what you truly desire. He tapped the compass on his belt. What do you desire, Izuku Midoriya? Izuku looked at the choppy water, the old boat, and the man with the pirate's smile. For the first time in a long time, the answer was clear. It wasn't to be the next All Might. It was to be free. Adventure, Izuku said, his voice surprisingly firm. I desire adventure. Captain Jack's grin widened, a flash of gold glinting in the twilight. He held out a hand, his palm calloused and rough. Then welcome aboard, mate. The rain had stopped, leaving the air fresh and cool as Izuku stepped onto the deck of the Black Pearl. The boat groaned beneath his feet, a symphony of old wood and forgotten voyages. Up close, the Captain Jack from the pier looked even more like a character straight out of a tall tale. He had a peculiar gait, a sort of rolling swagger, and his eyes darted around with an almost bird-like curiosity. Right then, Izuku, the captain said, pulling a greasy rag from his pocket and wiping down a section of the railing. First lesson of the sea, a ship ain't just wood and canvas. She's got a soul, you gotta treat her right, and she'll treat you right. Izuku, still a bit dazed by the sudden turn of events, nodded eagerly. So, what do I do first, Captain? Captain Jack stroked his beard thoughtfully. First, we gotta get her shipshape. That means patching those sails, scrubbing the deck until it shines like a mermaid's tear, and bailing out whatever waters snuck in. Think you're up to it, lad? Izuku's eyes scanned the dilapidated vessel. It looked like a monumental task, far more challenging than any hero training he'd ever imagined. But a thrill, sharp and exhilarating, shot through him. This was real. This was a tangible goal, not a distant dream denied by a quirk. Yes, Captain, I can do it. For the next few days, the pier became Izuku's new classroom. Captain Jack, whose real name Izuku soon learned was actually just Jack, was an unconventional teacher. He didn't explain things with diagrams or step-by-step instructions. Instead, he'd demonstrate a task once, sometimes twice, with a flourish and a mumbled instruction, then leave Izuku to figure out the rest. Watch the knot, lad, Jack would say, his nimble fingers tying an intricate bowline in seconds. Tight enough to hold a whale, loose enough to untie with a wink. Then he'd disappear below deck, leaving Izuku to fumble with the ropes until his fingers ached. Izuku learned to patch canvas with thick, waxed thread, the needle pricking his fingers until they were raw. He learned to scrub away layers of grime from the deck, his muscles burning with effort. He even learned to tell the difference between the sounds the boat made, the creak of the mast in the wind, the gentle lap of waves against the hull, and how each sound told a story. He was surprisingly resourceful, adapting to the tasks with a focused intensity that often surprised Jack. One afternoon, as Izuku was trying to hoist a new section of sail, the rope slipped from his grasp, sending the heavy canvas crashing back down. Frustration welled up inside him. He felt useless, just like he did when he couldn't control a quirk he didn't possess. Whoa there, easy does it, Izuku, Jack's voice said from behind him. He hadn't even heard the captain approach. The sea ain't a sprint, it's a dance. You gotta feel the rhythm. Jack took the rope from Izuku, his movements fluid and practiced. He tied it securely, then nudged Izuku with his elbow. Sometimes, the best way to get something done is to approach it from a different angle. Or, just charm it into cooperating. He winked. Izuku watched, fascinated, as Jack made a few small adjustments, talking to the rope as if it were a sentient being. Then, with a surprisingly delicate tug, the sail went up smoothly. Izuku blinked. The trick, Jack confided, leaning in conspiratorially, is to make it want to work for you. Everything on a ship, from the planks to the rigging, has a bit of a personality. Over the days, Izuku began to notice other quirks about Captain Jack. He had an uncanny ability to appear and disappear silently. He seemed to have an endless supply of cryptic sayings and dramatic gestures. And he had a particular fondness for rum, which he kept in a battered flask that was almost always at his hip. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues. Izuku sat on the deck, exhausted but content. The Black Pearl was starting to look less like a derelict and more like a ship ready for an adventure. Jack appeared beside him, a bottle of something clear in his hand. He took a swig. "You're a fast learner, Izuku. Got a good head on your shoulders, and a touch of the pirate's spirit. Though you could use a bit more flair." Izuku chuckled, a genuine laugh that felt lighter than any he'd had in months. "Flair, aye. A bit of swagger. A healthy disregard for the rules." "And," Jack said, reaching into a hidden pocket in his coat and pulling out a small, intricately carved wooden trinket, a miniature compass. "Every good pirate needs a compass that points to what they truly desire." He pressed it into Izuku's hand. "This one's seen a few adventures. May it guide you to yours." Izuku looked at the compass, then at the setting sun, and then back at Captain Jack. He wasn't Deku, the quirkless kid, anymore. He was Izuku, trainee pirate, standing on the deck of a ship called the Black Pearl, with a captain who saw more than just his lack of a quirk. He saw possibility. He saw adventure. "So, Captain," Izuku asked, clutching the wooden compass, a mischievous glint in his eye, "where are we sailing to first?" Captain Jack smiled, a wide, knowing grin. "Ah, that's the grand mystery, isn't it, lad? But I reckon it'll be somewhere interesting." He took another swig from his bottle, his gaze sweeping across the newly cleaned deck and the partially mended sails. "Somewhere that needs a bit of a shake-up. And perhaps, somewhere with a good bit of rum." The Black Pearl, now remarkably less decrepit thanks to Izuku's tireless efforts, cut through the waves with a newfound grace. The tattered sails, carefully patched and reinforced, billowed with the wind, carrying him further and further from the familiar shores of Musudafu. Captain Jack had vanished 3 days prior, leaving a cryptic note about acquiring provisions, and a wink that suggested he might be gone for weeks. But he'd also left Izuku with a clear directive: "Take her out, Izuku. Let her feel the open water. A ship unused is a ship unloved." So, here he was, Izuku Midoriya, solo captain of the Black Pearl. He'd painstakingly learned the basics: how to read the winds, how to adjust the rudder, and how to stay calm when a rogue wave threatened to swamp his small vessel. His hands, though still prone to ink stains from his hero notebooks, now bore calluses from ropes and wood. The wooden compass Jack had given him hung around his neck, pointing somewhere. He didn't know where, but it felt right. He was enjoying the rhythm of the sea, the gentle rocking, the salty spray against his face, when a strange, shimmering distortion appeared on the horizon. It grew rapidly, coalescing into a massive, domed structure. Izuku frowned. He hadn't seen anything like that on any of his nautical charts. Curiosity, a trait he now realized he shared with a certain eccentric captain, tugged at him. He adjusted the rudder, steering the Black Pearl towards the anomaly. As he got closer, a low hum vibrated through the water, growing into a thunderous roar. The dome wasn't just a structure, it was the unforeseen simulation joint, a training facility for heroes. And it was clearly in chaos. Explosions ripped through the glass, and dark figures moved within, clashing with the bright, vibrant costumes of UA. High students, villains. Izuku gasped, his blood running cold. His hero instincts, long suppressed, roared back to life. This wasn't a training exercise. This was a real invasion. Panic, familiar and suffocating, threatened to overwhelm him. He was just Izuku, quirkless. What could he possibly do against actual villains? But then he looked down at the helm, at the polished wood, at the compass swaying gently on his chest. This wasn't Musudafu's shore. This was the open sea. And this was his ship. A surge of determination, as potent as the crashing waves, filled him. He might not have a quirk, but he had the Black Pearl. He had the cunning Jack had instilled in him. He had courage. He aimed the ship directly for the main entrance, a section of the dome that appeared to be shattered. The villains within were too preoccupied with the students and pro-heroes to notice the small, approaching vessel. "All right, Pearl," Izuku muttered, gripping the helm tightly. "Let's make an entrance." He braced himself, remembering Jack's lessons on navigating tricky waters. With a powerful gust of wind, the Black Pearl shot forward, a defiant splinter of wood and canvas against the overwhelming might of the villain alliance. The ship smashed through the already fractured glass entrance of the USJ, showering the bewildered combatants inside with shards and salty water. The sudden, impossible appearance of a sailing ship in the middle of their invasion brought the fighting to a stunned halt. On the main deck of the Black Pearl, amidst the splintered glass and the scent of the sea, stood Izuku Midoriya. His clothes were soaked, his green hair plastered to his forehead, and his heart hammered like a drum against his ribs. He looked out at the frozen faces of villains and heroes alike, his eyes wide but firm. A villain with an array of hands covering his body, Tamura Shigaraki, slowly turned his head, his single visible eye narrowed. What, in the name of all for one, is that? Katsuki Bakugo, who had just been about to unleash an explosion on a group of lesser villains, stared with his jaw agape. Deku, what the hell are you doing on a boat? Izuku, still reeling from the shock of his own audacity, took a deep breath. He might not know exactly what to do next, but he knew one thing. He wasn't going to stand by and watch. He might be quirkless, but he was no longer helpless. He was a pirate, and pirates, as Captain Jack would say, always found a way. The silence in the USJ, broken only by the creak of the Black Pearl and the drip of water from its hull, was more deafening than any explosion. Every eye, hero and villain alike, was fixed on Izuku Midoriya. For a moment, he felt a familiar wave of nausea, the crippling self-doubt that had plagued him for years. But then, the salty air filled his lungs, and the sturdy deck beneath his feet reminded him, he wasn't just Izuku anymore. He was the captain. Who are you, you little brat? Tamura Shigaraki snarled, his voice rasping with annoyance. He scratched at his neck, clearly irritated by the interruption. You're not a hero, and you're certainly not one of us. Get out of the way. Izuku, still soaking wet, straightened his posture, trying to channel Captain Jack's unshakable bravado. This is my ship, he declared, his voice trembling only slightly. And you're trespassing. Shigaraki let out a guttural growl, then pointed a finger at Izuku. Kurogiri, deal with this nuisance. Or better yet, Nomu. From beside Shigaraki, a hulking, grotesque figure with exposed brain matter and bird-like features lurched forward. The Nomu, its very presence exuded raw, uncontrolled power, the kind that made even pro-heroes wary. Izuku's blood ran cold. This wasn't a minor villain, this was a monster. He'd seen its profile in his analysis notebooks. It was a bioweapon, designed to kill all might. The Nomu let out a guttural roar, its massive feet thudding against the concrete as it moved towards the ship. Izuku instinctively backed away, clutching the helm. His mind raced, frantically searching for a plan, any plan. He had no quirk, no combat training to speak of. All he had was a ship and a desperate, newfound resolve. Get off the boat, Deku. Bakugo yelled, momentarily forgetting his own fight as he watched the Nomu approach Izuku. You'll be crushed. He's right, young man. Retreat. 13, the space hero, called out, though her own situation was precarious. But Izuku couldn't retreat, not when students like Tsuyu and Mineta were trapped in the flood zone, and others were fighting for their lives. He thought of Captain Jack's unpredictable cunning, his ability to turn any situation to his advantage. All right, Nomu, Izuku muttered, a glint of desperation and defiance in his eyes. Let's see if ye can fight on the high seas. He spun the helm, pushing the ship's engine to its limits. The Black Pearl, already having burst through the entrance, now began to pivot within the USJ's massive central plaza. The Nomu, designed for brute force, seemed momentarily confused by the moving target. As the ship turned, Izuku noticed a series of thick, industrial cables crisscrossing above the cityscape zone of the USJ, used for special effects and lighting. An idea, wild and incredibly risky, sparked in his mind. Hey, ugly, Izuku yelled, trying to draw the Nomu's attention. He grabbed a coil of rope, one of the many he'd meticulously organized. Catch! He flung the rope with all his might, aiming it for one of the Nomu's massive arms. The creature, surprisingly agile, swatted it away with a powerful blow that could have shattered stone. Too easy, huh? Izuku gritted his teeth. He needed a distraction, something big. His eyes darted around the ship. Then he remembered. Below deck, in a dusty corner, Jack had kept a small, rather unstable-looking cannon. For emergencies, the captain had said with a grin. This certainly qualified as an emergency. He sprinted below deck, the Nomu now starting to pound on the ship's bow, making the whole vessel shudder. Izuku fumbled with the cannon, finding a handful of iron balls and a small pouch of powder. He'd never fired a cannon before, but he'd watched Jack clean it enough times. Load the ball, pack the powder, light the fuse. Simple, right? With shaking hands, he loaded the cannon, aiming it blindly towards the roof of the USJ, hoping to dislodge something. He lit the fuse with a nervous flick of a borrowed lighter. Boom! The cannon roared, the recoil throwing Izuku back against a crate. The iron ball shot upwards, not hitting the cables, but smashing into a giant, decorative light fixture high above. Wires sparked, and the fixture groaned, threatening to come crashing down. The unexpected explosion and the falling debris finally drew the Nomu's full attention upwards. It paused, looking at the groaning fixture, its brain seemingly processing the unexpected threat. This was Izuku's chance. He raced back up to the deck, taking the helm. The Nomu was now looking up, a prime target. Come on, Pearl, just a wee more speed. He urged the ship. With another push on the engine, the Black Pearl shot forward, directly under the Nomu. As the ship passed, Izuku grabbed a second, much longer rope he'd prepared earlier. With a desperate heave, he flung the rope, aiming it not for the Nomu itself, but for its leg, just as the creature was momentarily off balance from looking up. The rope, by sheer luck and perhaps a touch of pirate magic, snagged around the Nomu's ankle. Before the Nomu could react, Izuku rapidly spun the helm again, making the Black Pearl execute a sharp, violent turn. The rope, now taut, jerked the Nomu's leg, pulling it off balance. The creature stumbled, losing its footing on the slick, water-covered floor of the USJ. With an earth-shattering roar, the Nomu crashed down, not into the water, but directly onto the unstable light fixture above, sending sparks and shrapnel flying. The massive weight of the creature was too much for the already damaged structure. With a final, sickening groan of twisting metal, the light fixture, along with the Nomu, began to plummet. Nomu! Shigaraki shrieked, his voice filled with a rare panic. Izuku watched, breathless, as the monster fell. It wasn't dead, not by a long shot. But its trajectory was now aimed directly for the center of the USJ's ruins zone, far from the students and the pro-heroes, and into a deep, water-filled crevasse he'd seen on the maps. The Nomu hit the water with a colossal splash, creating a tidal wave that swept through the USJ, drenching everyone. For a moment, it vanished beneath the churning surface. Izuku stood on the deck of the Black Pearl, panting, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He had just outmaneuvered the Nomu. With a boat. From the sidelines, the heroes and students stared, utterly bewildered. Bakugo looked like his brain had short-circuited. Deku. You, what? Shigaraki, meanwhile, was in a rage. You little pest. Kurogiri, get that thing out of the water. And crush that ridiculous ship. But Izuku, though still terrified, felt a spark of something new and exhilarating. He had survived. He had acted. And he had a ship. He might not be able to punch through concrete, but he could outwit a monster. And that, he realized, was a kind of heroism all his own. The Nomu, a grotesque silhouette against the USJ's artificial sky, thrashed violently in the water-filled crevasse. Tamura Shigaraki, his hands twitching with fury, was screaming at Kurogiri to retrieve their bioweapon. The heroes and students, though temporarily safe from the immediate threat of the Nomu, were still pinned down by the remaining villains, their eyes flicking between the struggling monster and the improbable sight of a sailing ship in the middle of their training facility. Izuku, still at the helm of the Black Pearl, felt a surge of exhilaration give way to cold dread. He had bought them time, but the Nomu would be back, and his ship couldn't withstand a prolonged assault. He glanced at the splintered entry point, the broken glass still shimmering. No way out that he could see without running the gauntlet. You're going to regret that, little pirate. Shigaraki hissed, a menacing growl in his voice. Kurogiri, warp the weaker villains onto the ship. Don't let that brat escape. A dark, swirling vortex of mist began to form near the Black Pearl's deck. Izuku gripped the helm, his knuckles white. This was it. He was cornered. He wasn't a fighter, and his ship was small. He needed help. But from whom? His eyes fell to the wooden compass around his neck. It vibrated with a faint, unusual hum. He thought of Captain Jack's words. The sea cares about wit, and courage, and a compass that points to what you truly desire. And then, everything on a ship, from the planks to the rigging, has a bit of a personality. Izuku desired to protect these people. He desired a way out. And he desired a crew. A real crew. He looked at the ancient, weathered planks of the Black Pearl, the tattered sails, the silent cannon. It wasn't just wood and canvas, Jack had said. It had a soul. Could it hear him? Could it feel his desperation? Closing his eyes for a moment, Izuku poured every ounce of his will into the ship, a silent, desperate plea. Please, I need help. We need a crew. As he opened his eyes, a chill wind swept across the USJ, raising goosebumps on his arms. The air grew heavy, smelling not of salt and ocean, but of something ancient, something that had been buried for centuries. The light, already dim under the facility's dome, seemed to recede further. Then, from below deck, came a faint creaking sound, not of the ship's timbers, but of footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps that shouldn't be there. The sound echoed from the ship's cabin, then from the galley, growing louder. The villains who were about to warp onto the ship paused, sensing the sudden shift in atmosphere. Even Shigaraki's scratching stopped. The trapdoor to the ship's hold creaked open. A skeletal hand, encrusted with barnacles and seaweed, reached out, gripping the edge. Then, slowly, a figure emerged. It was a pirate, but one long past the land of the living. His uniform was in tatters, his bones gleamed sickly under the dim light, and his empty eye sockets glowed with a faint, eerie luminescence. He carried a rusted cutlass. Then another emerged, and another. From the shadows of the main cabin, from behind the mast, from the very planks of the deck, they rose. Half-rotted, barnacle-encrusted, their clothes decayed, their grins skeletal and chilling. They carried ancient flintlocks, broken swords, and hooks instead of hands. The smell of the deep ocean, of decay and time, filled the air. An undead pirate crew. There were a dozen of them, perhaps more, materializing from the very fabric of the Black Pearl. They moved with a slow, deliberate shuffle, their every movement a symphony of creaking bones and the rustle of decayed fabric. Their glowing eye sockets fixed on the villains. Shigaraki stared, utterly dumbfounded. What are those things? Kurogiri, for once, seemed to lose his composure, the mist of his body flickering erratically. These are not within the scope of our intelligence, Shigaraki Tamura. One of the skeletal pirates, larger than the others, with a tattered captain's coat, pointed a bony finger at the approaching villains. His jaw opened, and a raspy, ancient sound, like grinding coral, escaped him. It wasn't a roar, but a command that reverberated through Izuku's very soul: defend the ship. Izuku, still gripping the helm, watched in awe and terror as his new crew shuffled forward, raising their rusted weapons. They were silent, deadly, and utterly unfazed by the quirks of the villains. A villain tried to use his minor quirk, launching sharp feathers at the lead skeleton. The feathers harmlessly passed through its ribcage. Another tried to use a fire quirk, only for the flames to lick uselessly over the ancient bones. The undead pirates were invulnerable to most conventional attacks. They couldn't be harmed by physical blows or elemental quirks, their forms shifting like ancient mist through solid objects. When a villain tried to grab one, their hand simply passed through the decaying form. But when the undead pirates struck, their rusted blades and bony fists connected with chilling, unnatural force. The remaining villains, already demoralized, broke into a panicked retreat, screaming in terror. Even the hardened criminals were no match for a crew of the literally undead. Izuku watched his skeletal crew systematically clear the deck, their silent movements a macabre ballet. He had wished for a crew, but this was beyond anything he could have imagined. His compass hummed, warm against his chest. The Black Pearl truly was more than just a ship. And now, so was its captain. The Nomu was still struggling in the watery abyss, its roars echoing with frustration. But on the deck of the Black Pearl, a new, chilling silence had fallen. The League of Villains, including a bewildered Shigaraki and a visibly disturbed Kurogiri, watched in stunned horror as Izuku Midoriya stood among a dozen undead pirates. Their skeletal forms crackled faintly, their empty eye sockets glowing with an eerie, ancient light. Izuku, still drenched and shaken, felt a profound connection to these spectral beings. They were part of the ship, and now, they were his crew. He didn't understand how or why, but the wooden compass around his neck pulsed with a faint warmth, confirming this impossible reality. One of the larger skeletons, the one with the tattered captain's coat, stepped forward, its bony gaze sweeping over the remaining villains. It turned its skull towards Izuku, and though it had no mouth, Izuku heard a silent, telepathic question in his mind, clear as a bell. "Orders, Captain." Izuku swallowed, his throat dry. This was it. He could stay on the ship, safe with his spectral guardians, and wait for the heroes to handle the rest. Or he could act. His gaze flickered to the students, still trying to fend off scattered villains, and to All Might, who was undoubtedly being pushed to his limits by Shigaraki and the Nomu. He thought of all the times he'd been told he couldn't be a hero. He thought of Jack's words, a healthy disregard for the rules. Rules didn't apply to undead pirates. "All right, crew," Izuku yelled, his voice finding a strength he didn't know he possessed. He pointed a trembling finger at the main group of villains surrounding Shigaraki, who were still reeling from the sudden appearance of his macabre forces. "Full speed ahead, we be reclaimin' dis unforeseen simulation joint." With an unearthly clatter of bones and rusted steel, the undead pirates surged forward. They didn't run. They moved with an unnatural glide, their tattered clothes fluttering in a phantom breeze. Their invulnerability proved to be their greatest weapon. Villains tried to strike them with quirks, but their attacks passed harmlessly through the ethereal forms. One villain tried to restrain a skeleton with a binding quirk, only for the skeleton to phase right through it. The League of Villains, trained to fight living opponents with predictable quirks, were completely unprepared. The undead pirates were silent, relentless, and utterly terrifying. A skeletal hand would punch, and the villain would feel the impact with jarring force, even as the hand seemed to pass through their body. Rusted cutlasses, impossibly sharp, would clang against weapons, leaving deep gouges. Izuku, fueled by a surge of adrenaline, leapt from the Black Pearl's deck, landing surprisingly lightly on the concrete floor. He still had no quirk, no superhuman strength. But he had his wits, and he had his crew. He darted through the chaos, observing, analyzing, just as he always had. He pointed his finger, not at villains, but at specific points of the environment. "Over there," he shouted, pointing at a loose piece of scaffolding near a group of villains. "Cut the ropes." One of the skeletal pirates, with a gnarled hook for a hand, moved with unnatural speed, severing the ropes with a single, spectral swing. The scaffolding crashed down, pinning several villains beneath it. "Distract the big one," Izuku commanded, pointing to a bulky villain with a strength quirk who was holding off several students. 3 skeletons immediately swarmed him, their silent, relentless attacks forcing the villain onto the defensive, giving the students a chance to escape. Shigaraki, now screaming in frustration, tried to use his decay quirk on one of the skeletons. But as his hand touched its bony arm, his quirk simply had no effect. The skeleton, with an unnerving creak, simply punched him in the face. "They're invulnerable," a terrified villain shrieked, as an undead pirate simply walked through a wall of fire. Izuku, weaving through the panicked villains, felt a grin stretch across his face. This was exhilarating. This was piracy. Not heroics, not exactly, but something just as effective. He was causing chaos, turning the tide of battle, protecting people in his own strange way. The chaos created by Izuku and his ghostly crew was immense. The villains, demoralized and terrified, began to break formation, many attempting to flee the nightmarish spectacle. Shigaraki, realizing his forces were crumbling, screamed at Kurogiri. "Kurogiri, get the Nomu out of there. We're retreating." As Kurogiri opened a massive warp gate near the crevasse, Izuku's gaze landed on a familiar blonde figure. All Might, bruised but still resolute, had just been freed from a struggle with a group of villains that the undead pirates had cleared. He looked at Izuku, then at the skeletal crew, his expression a mixture of confusion and profound relief. Izuku didn't wait for questions. His compass hummed. He knew what he had to do next. "Crew," he yelled, his voice echoing with newfound authority. "Fall back the Pearl. We be na leddin, escape wid, dat monster." The undead pirates, with eerie obedience, began to dissolve back into the shadows and into the very planks of the ship, leaving behind a bewildered and defeated league of villains. Izuku scrambled back onto the Black Pearl, already turning the helm, ready to pursue. He might not know where Captain Jack was, but he was certainly making a name for himself. The Black Pearl now felt less like a ramshackle boat and more like an extension of Izuku's will. The remaining villains scattered like startled gulls, and the undead pirates, their forms phasing back into the ship's timbers, left behind an unnerving silence. Only the thrashing of the Nomu in the crevasse and the furious shouts of Shigaraki broke the quiet. "Kurogiri, now, get him out," Shigaraki shrieked, his voice raw with desperation. The dark mist of Kurogiri's body swirled, already expanding into a massive warp gate directly above the Nomu, ready to swallow the monstrous bioweapon whole. Izuku didn't hesitate. He knew that if the League escaped with the Nomu, the heroes would have a much harder time dealing with them later. This was his chance, his one shot to make a real difference beyond merely surviving. He raced back to the ship's single cannon, the one he'd so clumsily fired earlier. But this time, he wasn't alone. As he reached it, a skeletal pirate with a burning fuse clutched in its bony fingers materialized beside him. It was the same one who'd helped with the earlier cannon shot, its hollow eyes fixed on Izuku, awaiting orders. "We can't let them take the Nomu," Izuku yelled, his voice carrying over the din. "Aim for Kurogiri. Prevent the warp gate." The skeleton creaked, a sound that oddly conveyed understanding. It moved with surprising speed, adjusting the cannon's angle. Izuku quickly fed another iron ball into the muzzle, his hands working with practiced efficiency. He'd watched Jack load it often enough. "Ready, mate," he muttered, more to himself than the skeleton. The undead pirate gave a sharp nod of its skull, its glowing eye sockets fixed on Kurogiri, who was now fully committed to expanding the gate. "Fire," Izuku commanded, pointing with a dramatic flourish, mimicking Captain Jack's flair. Boom! The cannon roared, the sound echoing explosively through the USJ. The iron ball, propelled by a burst of acrid smoke, hurtled across the artificial training ground. It wasn't aimed at Kurogiri's body directly. Izuku was still a hero at heart, even if he commanded an undead crew, but precisely at the center of the warp gate just as it stabilized around the Nomu. The cannonball struck with incredible force, not harming Kurogiri, but causing a massive instability in the warp gate. The shimmering black mist flickered wildly, convulsed, and then, with a sound like tearing fabric, it collapsed in on itself, imploding with a burst of static energy. The Nomu, which had been halfway through the portal, was suddenly spat back out, crashing into the water with another massive splash. Its roars of frustration were now mixed with what sounded like pained confusion. "Kurogiri," Shigaraki bellowed, his voice filled with pure, unadulterated rage. He spun to face Izuku, his single visible eye blazing. You pest." Kurogiri flickered, clearly disoriented by the unexpected disruption. "Shigaraki Tamura, my warp gate was compromised. An external force. I cannot re-establish it immediately without risking further damage." The heroes, who had been watching the attempted retreat with dismay, now looked on in utter shock. All Might, still recovering, saw the scrawny boy from the beach, standing on a pirate ship, having single-handedly thwarted the villains' escape. Izuku grinned, a wide, triumphant, and slightly manic grin. He'd done it. He'd faced down a monster, survived, and stopped the villains from making off with their ultimate weapon. He might not have a quirk, but he had a ship, a cannon, and a very dedicated, if dead, crew. He looked at the still furious Shigaraki, who was now being joined by the other, lesser villains, all converging on the Black Pearl. Izuku knew he couldn't fight them directly. But he had bought the heroes invaluable time. "All right, crew," Izuku yelled, throwing his arm wide. "Time to make a tactical retreat. And perhaps find some better rum." With a final creak of timbers and a spectral shimmer, the undead pirate crew began to phase back into the Black Pearl, ready for their next impossible command. Izuku spun the helm, guiding his ship away from the enraged villains, leaving the cleanup to the bewildered pro-heroes. The Black Pearl, still rocking from the cannon's recoil, was a beacon of defiance, carrying its unlikely captain towards whatever adventure lay next. The Black Pearl made its hasty exit from the USJ, leaving behind a scene of utter pandemonium. Shigaraki was still screaming curses, the Nomu was slowly pulling itself from the water, and the remaining villains were in full retreat. The UA students, though shaken, were now rallying, thanks to the bizarre intervention. As Izuku spun the helm, Guiding his ship through the shattered entrance and back into the open ocean, he risked a glance back. What he saw made his blood run cold, then fizz with a strange excitement. Emerging from the USJ's broken dome, soaring through the air like a beacon of justice, was All Might. Behind him, on various makeshift platforms created by quirks or in their own vehicles, followed a furious contingent of UA faculty. There was Principal Nezu in a specialized, armored vehicle, the stoic Eraserhead gliding on a capture weapon, Present Mike's sound waves rippling the air, and even Recovery Girl in a small, hovering medical craft. They weren't just observing, they were pursuing. He's heading out to sea. Present Mike's voice boomed, amplified by his quirk. The kid on the pirate ship. Unbelievable, Eraserhead muttered, his eyes narrowed, trying to comprehend the sheer anomaly of a literal pirate ship involved in a villain attack. Izuku swallowed hard. He knew he'd caused a stir, but he hadn't anticipated a full-blown chase by UA's most powerful heroes. He gripped the helm tighter. "All right, Pearl," he murmured, "time to show them what you're made of." He pushed the ship's engine to its limit, the old vessel cutting through the waves with surprising speed. The sea air whipped through his green hair, and the wooden compass vibrated with a frantic energy. He had no idea where he was going, only that he couldn't let them catch him just yet. He needed to think. All Might, despite his injuries, surged forward, easily keeping pace with the ship. He landed gracefully on the water beside the Black Pearl, causing a small splash. His iconic grin, though strained, was in place. "Young man," All Might's voice boomed, resonating with a mixture of confusion and concern. "We need to talk about what just transpired. Pull over your vessel." Izuku gulped. All Might, right next to his ship. It was a dream come true, and a nightmare rolled into one. He had to think fast. What would Captain Jack do? He wouldn't surrender, not gracefully. "Can't hear you over the sound of freedom, All Might." Izuku yelled back, trying to sound as nonchalant as possible, though his heart was hammering. He subtly adjusted the rudder, aiming for a cluster of small, uninhabited islands that dotted the coastline. The other UA faculty members began to converge. Eraserhead floated silently above, his eyes scanning the ship. Principal Nezu's vehicle sped up, trying to cut off his path. From behind them, propelled by powerful explosions, Katsuki Bakugo roared, "Deku! What the hell are you doing on a boat? You're gonna get yourself killed." His anger was less about the chase and more about the sheer audacity of Izuku's latest impossible feat. Izuku ignored them all, focusing on the wind and the waves. He dodged a gentle attempt by All Might to grab the ship's rigging. He could feel the eyes of the heroes scrutinizing every inch of the Black Pearl, every detail of his peculiar command. He knew they'd be wondering about the spectral crew he'd just commanded, the cannon, the whole impossible spectacle. As he neared the islands, Izuku made a sudden, sharp turn, aiming the Black Pearl through a narrow, rocky passage that would be difficult for All Might and the larger UA vehicles to navigate. The ship scraped against the rocks, but held firm. "He's skilled at evasion," Eraserhead noted, impressed despite himself. Too skilled for a civilian. All Might, however, wasn't giving up. He powered through the water, determined to reach the boy. "Young man, this is not a game. You risked your life, and you possess abilities we need to understand." Izuku, now weaving the Black Pearl through the treacherous waters between the islands, couldn't help but feel a thrill. He was being chased by heroes. Not for being a hero, or a villain, but for being something else entirely. A pirate. He looked at the open sea beyond the islands, vast and inviting. Somewhere out there, Captain Jack was probably off on some eccentric adventure. And somewhere out there, Izuku realized, was his own. The chase continued, the Black Pearl a nimble phantom weaving through the coastal islands while All Might and the UA faculty gave relentless pursuit. Izuku, adrenaline coursing through his veins, steered with a pirate's instinct, dodging All Might's powerful but restrained attempts to halt the ship. The air crackled with the sheer impossibility of the situation, the world's greatest heroes pursuing a quirkless kid on a spectral pirate ship. As the Black Pearl emerged from a particularly narrow channel, All Might, with a burst of speed, landed squarely on the ship's bow. His immense presence overshadowed Izuku, filling the deck. He was no longer just a distant idol, he was right there, a towering figure of justice and concern. "Young Midoriya," All Might boomed, his voice gentler but firm, "This ends now. You need to come with us. We must understand how you accomplished what you did at the USJ, and why a civilian is commanding this." His gaze swept over the ship, lingering on where the undead crew had been. "It's too dangerous for you to be out here, especially without proper training or a license." Izuku stared up at his former idol, the man who had crushed his dreams just months ago. The words, "You can't become a hero without a quirk," echoed in his mind, sharp and painful. He remembered the despair, the feeling of being utterly worthless. And now, this same man was telling him he was too dangerous, without proper training, implying he was still inadequate, still not enough. Something snapped. The fear that had been gnawing at him was replaced by a surge of raw, indignant anger. He wasn't Deku, the useless boy, anymore. He was the captain of the Black Pearl. He had a crew. He had fought a monster. He had freedom. His hand instinctively went to the rusted cutlass he'd found in the ship's armory, a relic of a bygone era. He drew it with a surprisingly fluid motion, the metal glinting menacingly in the sun. "You told me," Izuku said, his voice low, trembling with suppressed rage, "that I couldn't be a hero. You told me to give up. And now you want to take away the only thing I have left." He gripped the cutlass tighter, its cold steel grounding him. "This ship, this crew, this is my dream now." Before All Might could react, before the faculty could even process the words, Izuku, channeling a desperate, pirate-like ferocity, swung the cutlass. It wasn't a practiced strike, but a furious, emotional one. The rusted blade slashed towards All Might's arm, a direct, albeit futile, act of defiance. All Might, surprised by the sudden, aggressive move from the typically timid boy, reacted instantly. He effortlessly blocked the strike with his forearm, the cutlass scraping harmlessly against his hardened skin. But the action itself, the sheer audacity, stunned him. "Young Midoriya, what are you doing?" All Might exclaimed, his voice laced with shock. "You want me to give up?" Izuku roared, tears of frustration stinging his eyes. He pointed the cutlass dramatically at the approaching UA faculty. "Crew, engage the enemy, except him," he shouted, pointing the blade directly at Eraserhead, who was silently gliding closer, his red eyes blazing, preparing to use his quirk. With a chilling cacophony of creaking bones and spectral shimmers, the undead pirate crew erupted from the deck and below, materializing as if from thin air. They moved with an unsettling, silent grace, their glowing eye sockets fixed on the approaching heroes. The skeletal captain, with its tattered coat, led the charge, leaping from the ship towards Present Mike, its rusted cutlass raised. Other skeletons swarmed towards Principal Nezu's vehicle, their intangible forms phasing through its armor, causing circuits to spark and systems to glitch. Another launched itself at Recovery Girl's hovering craft, its bony fingers reaching for the controls. Panic flared among the UA staff. These weren't villains with predictable quirks. These were ghosts. Attacks passed through them, yet their blows landed with bone-jarring force. Eraserhead, his capture weapon unfurling, focused his gaze intently on Izuku. His eyes glowed crimson, activating his erasure quirk, ready to nullify whatever power Izuku was using to summon and control these specters. He held the gaze, maintaining the erasure for several long seconds, expecting the spectral crew to vanish, for Izuku to falter. But nothing happened. The undead pirates continued their silent, relentless assault. Izuku stood defiantly on the deck, his cutlass still clutched in his hand, his eyes burning with a strange, unyielding light. Eraserhead's eyes widened, a rare look of profound confusion crossing his normally stoic face. His quirk was active, he was erasing, but there was nothing to erase. Izuku Midoriya wasn't using a quirk. He wasn't connected to the spectral crew by any detectable power. The realization hit Eraserhead like a physical blow. This wasn't a quirk. This was something else entirely. Something beyond their understanding. Something supernatural. The chaos on the water intensified. The UA faculty, accustomed to facing powerful quirks, found themselves utterly bewildered by Izuku's undead pirate crew. Present Mike's sonic blasts harmlessly passed through spectral forms. Principal Nezu's vehicle was short-circuiting as ghostly hands phase-touched its internal wiring, and Recovery Girl found her medical craft swarmed by silent, skeletal figures. Meanwhile, on the Black Pearl's deck, All Might struggled to comprehend Izuku's sudden, furious defiance. "Young Midoriya, what has gotten into you?" This isn't how heroes act. Heroes. Izuku spat, his voice raw with emotion. He backed All Might further across the deck, the rusted cutlass still clutched in his trembling hand, pointing towards the ship's bow. You said I couldn't be one. You took away my dream. His anger, fueled by years of suppressed pain, gave him a strange, fierce energy. The wooden compass around his neck pulsed, mirroring the erratic beat of his heart. The skeletal crew, sensing their captain's fury, pressed their ethereal assault on the other heroes with renewed intensity. Suddenly, Eraserhead's voice, sharp and urgent, cut through the din. He had ceased his attempts to erase Izuku's quirk, and was now flying close to Principal Nezu's vehicle, his capture weapon wrapped around its roof. All Might, faculty, listen to me, Eraserhead yelled, his voice strained but clear. He's not using a quirk. My erasure is active, and there's nothing for it to cancel. This isn't a quirk factor, it's something else entirely. A collective gasp, even amidst the chaos, went through the faculty. No quirk. Then how was he commanding spectral entities? How was he doing any of this? The revelation only deepened the mystery surrounding Izuku and the Black Pearl. All Might, distracted by Eraserhead's shocking declaration, momentarily lowered his guard. It was just the opening Izuku needed. Get on the plank, Izuku snarled, his eyes blazing, his voice now imbued with a surprising authority. He gestured with the cutlass towards a narrow, unstable-looking plank of wood that jutted out from the ship's side, clearly a precarious feature of the Black Pearl. All Might, caught off guard by the sheer audacity of the command from such a seemingly powerless boy, took a hesitant step back, onto the makeshift plank. It groaned under his immense weight. Young Midoriya, this is foolishness. Let's discuss this rationally, All Might pleaded, attempting to reason with the enraged boy. But rationality was far from Izuku's mind. He was no longer the timid, analytical fanboy. He was a pirate, driven by a primal need for freedom and a desperate defiance against those who would box him in. This is my ship, and you're invading it, Izuku roared, taking another step forward, closing the distance between them. The plank creaked ominously. This is what happens to invaders. Without another word, fueled by a raw, unyielding anger that surprised even himself, Izuku launched forward. He didn't use the cutlass. Instead, he lashed out with a desperate, two-footed kick, catching All Might squarely in the back. The kick, though lacking any superhuman force, was perfectly timed. All Might, already off balance on the narrow plank, stumbled. His eyes widened in disbelief. With a mighty splash that sent water showering over the ship and the surrounding faculty, the symbol of peace, the beacon of justice, the one who had once told a boy he couldn't be a hero, was sent tumbling into the churning sea. A stunned silence fell over the UA faculty. All Might, in the water, looked up at Izuku, his iconic smile replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated bewilderment. Izuku stood at the edge of the plank, chest heaving, his face wet with sea spray and tears of frustration. He had done it. He had kicked All Might off his ship. It was an act of rebellion, a declaration of independence, and perhaps, the start of a whole new kind of adventure. The next morning dawned with a strange, almost eerie calm. The news channels were ablaze with fragmented reports of the USJ attack, tales of a sudden villain invasion, the unexpected arrival of an old sailing ship, and the bizarre, terrifying appearance of something else. No one, not even the pro-heroes, quite knew how to explain the undead pirates, or the quirkless boy who commanded them. Katsuki Bakugo, however, knew. And he was absolutely seething. After a night of endless debriefings and bewildered questions from the faculty, he'd barely slept. His rage had finally cooled into a simmering frustration that demanded answers. There was only one place he could think to go. He stormed through the streets to the Midoriya apartment, his explosions popping irritably in his palms. He didn't bother knocking, just threw the door open to reveal Inko Midoriya, Izuku's mother, watering a small potted plant in the living room. She looked tired, but remarkably calm. Auntie Inko, Bakugo practically roared, startling her so much she nearly dropped the watering can. Did you hear? Did you see? It was Deku, at the USJ. On a goddamn pirate ship. Inko blinked, setting the watering can down gently. She turned to face him, a faint, melancholic smile on her lips. Oh, Katsuki, you mean Izuku? Bakugo stared, momentarily dumbfounded. You You knew. How could you possibly know? He was there. He brought a boat. And then there were things. And he kicked All Might off the boat. All Might. Bakugo threw his hands up in exasperation, his spiky hair seeming to bristle even more. He was commanding. Ghosts. And Eraserhead said he doesn't even have a quirk. Inko walked over to the sofa and sat down, patting the cushion beside her. Sit down, Katsuki. You look like you're about to explode. Bakugo, still fuming, reluctantly plopped down. But, how could you not be surprised? This is Deku we're talking about. The quirkless loser who cried about everything. Inko sighed, a soft, almost wistful sound. She picked up a framed photo from a nearby table. A younger Izuku, no older than 5, beaming with a tiny, toy pirate hat perched on his head, a plastic sword in his hand, standing in front of a crude drawing of a ship. Izuku was always a dreamer, Katsuki, she began, her voice gentle. Even after his diagnosis, he never truly let go of his fantastical notions. He filled countless notebooks with his hero analysis, yes, but before that, they were filled with tales of adventure. Of hidden treasures, and grand voyages. She smiled, a faraway look in her eyes. He always loved stories of pirates. Especially one particular captain, I remember. A very peculiar man, who always found a way out of trouble, no matter how impossible. Bakugo leaned forward, his anger momentarily forgotten, replaced by sheer disbelief. But, ghosts, Auntie Inko. A literal pirate ship, that's not just dreaming, that's crazy. Inko looked at him, her gaze surprisingly steady. Is it any crazier than a boy who can spontaneously combust? Or a man who can shrink himself down to a tiny size? The world has always been full of wonders, Katsuki. Just because Izuku never manifested a traditional quirk doesn't mean he wasn't special. He always had a way of finding the most extraordinary paths. She paused, then added, almost to herself, besides, he's always been drawn to the sea. He would spend hours at the docks, watching the ships come and go. He even spoke of a certain Captain Jack. Bakugo's jaw dropped. Captain Jack, he mentioned him. A crazy old man with a beard and a compass. He leapt up, pacing the small living room. So, you're telling me, you're just fine with your son running around on a ghost ship, battling villains, and kicking the symbol of peace into the ocean? Inko chuckled softly, a hint of worry finally touching her eyes, though it was quickly masked by a quiet resignation. Of course I'm worried, Katsuki. Terribly so. But, when Izuku sets his mind to something, he always finds a way. And if this is his way of finding his adventure, of finding his place in the world, then, who am I to stop him? She looked at the photograph again, a tender smile on her face. He's always been my little pirate. Bakugo stopped pacing, staring at Inko as if she'd grown a second head. He had come here for answers, for validation of his outrage, but all he found was a calm, almost serene acceptance. His childhood friend, Deku, was now the captain of a supernatural vessel, waging war on villains, and his mother was, unsurprised. It was, Bakugo realized with a jolt, just as insane as everything else that had happened at the USJ. And somehow, coming from Auntie Inko, it made a strange, terrifying kind of sense. The calm in the Midoriya apartment was shattered abruptly. Not long after Bakugo's bewildered departure, a thunderous knock rattled the door. Before Inko could even reach it, the door swung open, revealing a tense All Might, now thoroughly dried and back in his hero form, followed by a grim-faced Eraserhead, a flustered Present Mike, and the ever-composed Principal Nezu. The small living room suddenly felt impossibly crowded. Mrs. Midoriya, All Might began, his voice serious, we need to talk about your son, Izuku. Inko, though surprised by the sudden intrusion, remained remarkably composed. She offered them tea, which the heroes politely declined. I assume this is about the USJ incident, she said, her voice soft but steady. Indeed, Eraserhead cut in, his eyes narrowed. Mrs. Midoriya, your son, Izuku, appeared at the USJ on an old sailing vessel, commanded what appeared to be spectral entities, and directly interfered with a villain attack, even engaging the Nomu. Furthermore, he then assaulted All Might and evaded UA faculty pursuit. We have reason to believe he is connected to an unknown power source, possibly a quirk we are unaware of. Inko sighed, a familiar, resigned sound. Izuku doesn't have a quirk, Mr. Aizawa. He was diagnosed many years ago. Then how do you explain the undead crew? Present Mike blurted out, his voice cracking with disbelief. And the ship appearing out of nowhere. Principal Nezu, perched on All Might's shoulder, spoke with a calm, analytical tone. Mrs. Midoriya, we understand this is difficult. However, Izuku's actions are highly irregular and pose a significant security risk, not to mention a danger to himself. We need to bring him in for questioning. For his safety, and for the safety of the public. Inko's gentle demeanor faltered slightly. Bring him in. He's just a boy. He was trying to help. Helping by kicking the symbol of peace into the ocean and commanding a ghost army. Bakugo's voice suddenly cut in from the doorway. He hadn't left, apparently, lingering to see the fallout. He's lost it. The heroes ignored Bakugo. Eraserhead stepped forward. Mrs. Midoriya, we have reason to believe Izuku is currently at sea. We need to speak with him. Given his unique abilities, we believe the most effective way to ensure his cooperation is to have you accompany us to UA. Hi. From there, we can send a message, ensuring his safe return. Inko's eyes widened. You want to use me as bait? All Might stepped forward, his expression earnest. It's not like that, Mrs. Midoriya. We simply believe he will respond to a direct appeal from you. We assure you, you will be safe at UA. Despite her apprehension, Inko could see the determination in their faces. She knew arguing would be futile. More importantly, a part of her understood their concern. Izuku was out there, on a strange ship, with an even stranger crew. Perhaps this was the only way to ensure he was truly safe. Very well, Inko said, her voice barely a whisper. I'll come. Far out at sea, the Black Pearl cut through the waves, a lone silhouette against the setting sun. Izuku stood at the helm, the wooden compass warm against his chest. He was still buzzing from the confrontation, the sheer audacity of kicking All Might into the water. He felt powerful, free. Suddenly, a crackle of static filled the air, followed by the unmistakable, amplified voice of Present Mike. It wasn't a general broadcast. It was directed, somehow, specifically at the Black Pearl. Attention, Captain of the Black Pearl. This is UA High School. We have your mother, Inko Midoriya, in our custody at the school. If you wish to ensure her safety and discuss your recent actions, surrender yourself and your vessel immediately. We await your arrival. The words hit Izuku like a physical blow. His mother, in custody, at UA. They were using her as bait. The anger that had simmered at the USJ, that had flared when he confronted All Might, now erupted into a blinding, all-consuming rage. His grip on the helm tightened, the wood groaning under the pressure. The wooden compass around his neck pulsed frantically, mirroring the furious beat of his heart. My mother, Izuku roared, his voice echoing across the waves, raw with fury. They took my mother. The deck of the Black Pearl began to rumble, a low, guttural growl emanating from its very core. From below deck, from the shadows of the mast, from the very planks, the undead pirate crew began to materialize, their skeletal forms glowing with an eerie, reddish light, their empty eye sockets burning with a shared, silent fury. They sensed their captain's rage, and it was their own. Izuku's eyes, usually wide and innocent, were now narrowed, a dangerous glint within them. He looked towards the distant shore, towards the direction of UA. Hi. They wanted him. They wanted to use his mother against him. They'll regret this, Izuku snarled, his voice a low, dangerous growl that would have made Captain Jack proud. He spun the helm, turning the Black Pearl with a violent jerk, aiming its bow directly back towards the land, towards UA. Hi. Prepare for battle, crew. He bellowed, his voice carrying over the wind and the waves. We're going to get my mother back. And UA is going to learn what happens when you cross a pirate. The Black Pearl, propelled by an unnatural speed, sliced through the waves towards the shore, a grim determination hanging over its deck. Izuku stood at the helm, his face set in a mask of cold fury. The message from UA had been received, and his response was not going to be a polite discussion. As the Black Pearl approached the UA coastline, the imposing, fortified structure of the school came into view. Pro-heroes stood guard along the shore, a clear attempt to intercept him. But Izuku had no intention of stopping for pleasantries. He steered the ship directly towards the shore, the undead crew silently assembling around him, their skeletal forms radiating a palpable sense of menace. As the Black Pearl ran aground with a jarring crunch, Izuku drew his rusted cutlass, its edge gleaming ominously in the morning light. "Crew," he bellowed, his voice echoing across the beach. "Our mission is clear. Engage the faculty. Retrieve my mother. Bring her aboard." With a terrifying, silent surge, the undead pirates flooded over the ship's sides, their spectral forms gliding across the sand towards the assembled heroes. Chaos erupted instantly. Present Mike's sonic screams passed harmlessly through the skeletons, while their rusted blades and bony fists struck with chilling force. Ectoplasm's clones found themselves unable to contain the intangible figures, their ghostly forms simply phasing through the ectoplasmic constructs. Izuku, cutlass in hand, leapt from the deck, landing on the sand with surprising agility. He ignored the skirmishes erupting around him, his gaze fixed on the main UA building. "Mother!" he yelled, his voice cutting through the pandemonium. He charged towards the building, the undead captain, its tattered coat billowing in a non-existent wind, gliding silently at his side, its glowing eye sockets fixed on any threat that approached Izuku. Inside the UA main building, the faculty, who had been waiting tensely with Inko, were caught completely off guard by the sudden, spectral assault. Alarms blared, and the heroes rushed to engage the unexpected enemy. Izuku burst through the main entrance, his eyes scanning frantically for his mother. He spotted her being escorted by Smintos down a hallway. "Mother!" Izuku yelled again, sprinting towards her. Smintos turned, his concrete body shifting to form a defensive wall. But before he could fully react, the undead captain materialized in front of him, its rusted cutlass whistling through the air. The blade, impossibly sharp despite its age, sliced through the concrete as if it were butter, forcing Smintos to stumble back in surprise. "Izuku!" Inko cried out, relief and fear mixing in her voice. "Get her!" Izuku commanded his spectral captain, who wordlessly obliged, its skeletal hand gently taking Inko's arm, phasing slightly through her flesh but providing a firm grip. As the undead captain led Inko back towards the beach, Izuku found himself face to face with All Might, who had rushed into the building, his expression a mixture of concern and stern resolve. "Young Midoriya, this has gone too far." All Might boomed, his stance ready for battle. "Stand down and release your crew." Izuku's eyes narrowed, his grip tightening on his cutlass. He remembered the crushing words, the dismissal of his lifelong dream. His anger flared anew. The undead captain, having escorted Inko most of the way to the Black Pearl, suddenly reappeared beside Izuku, its glowing gaze fixed on All Might. With a silent, knowing gesture, it moved with unnatural speed, its rusted cutlass aimed not at All Might's powerful limbs, but at his side, at the precise spot where his weakened form concealed his past injury, a secret known to few. The spectral blade, seemingly unimpeded by muscle and bone, sliced through the air and connected with a sickeningly soft thud against All Might's vulnerable area. A gasp of pain escaped the symbol of peace as a visible shockwave rippled through his body, causing him to momentarily revert to his smaller, weakened form, a trickle of blood appearing at the corner of his mouth. The undead captain then turned back towards the beach, its task complete, leaving a stunned and weakened All Might staring in disbelief at Izuku, who simply gave a curt nod to his spectral commander before turning to follow his mother back to the Black Pearl. The message had been delivered. This was no longer a discussion, it was a boarding action. The air at UA High crackled with disbelief. All Might, weakened and clutching his side, stared in shock as Izuku simply nodded to his spectral captain, who now moved with chilling purpose towards the main entrance. The faculty, reeling from the sudden, impossible assault of the undead crew, were momentarily frozen, their strategies shattered by an enemy they couldn't touch. Izuku didn't spare a glance for the fallen symbol of peace. His focus was entirely on his mother. He sprinted towards the main entrance, where the undead captain gently guided Inko Midoriya. Her face was pale, but her eyes held a strange mix of fear and an almost dazed relief as she saw her son. "Izuku," she gasped as he reached her, taking her arm. "It's okay, Mom, I've got you," Izuku said, his voice softer than it had been since the broadcast, but still edged with a fierce protectiveness. He helped her navigate the debris and the startled heroes, leading her towards the beached Black Pearl. The remaining faculty members, shaken but recovering, began to rally. Eraserhead was shouting orders, trying to coordinate a counterattack against the scattered, ethereal pirates. Present Mike unleashed another sonic blast, futilely attempting to deter the spectral figures swarming around the immobilized Principal Nezu's vehicle. As Izuku guided Inko to the ship's gangplank, the undead crew, having successfully sown chaos and secured their captain's objective, began to phase back, their forms shimmering and dissolving into the very fabric of the UA grounds and the ship itself. It was a terrifying, almost seamless retreat. "Get her aboard, quickly," Izuku commanded the remaining few skeletal crew members near the gangplank. They moved with silent efficiency, their bony hands providing support as Inko, still a bit dazed, stepped onto the deck of the Black Pearl. Once Inko was safely on deck, a gasp escaping her as she felt the ancient wood beneath her feet, Izuku turned back to face the shore. The heroes were regrouping, their eyes fixed on him with a mixture of confusion, anger, and stark determination. "Crew," Izuku roared, his voice carrying over the sound of the waves. "Return to the Pearl, full retreat." With a final, chilling clatter of bones and the faint scent of brine and decay, the last of the undead pirates dissolved back into the ship, their duty done. The Black Pearl, as if sensing its crew's return and its captain's will, shuddered. The hull, which had been resting firmly on the sand, began to creak. Izuku rushed to the helm, spinning the wheel with a practiced motion. The ship, with a groan of old timbers and the whisper of the newly materialized sails, began to push itself off the sand, slowly at first, then gaining momentum as the ocean current caught it. From the shore, All Might, now back in his muscular form but clearly favoring his side, watched with a grim expression. He knew, as did the rest of the faculty, that this was far from over. They had encountered something entirely new, something beyond quirks, beyond their understanding. As the Black Pearl pulled away from the UA coastline, Izuku stood at the helm, his mother beside him, staring back at the stunned heroes. He had challenged the symbol of peace, outmaneuvered the top hero academy, and reclaimed what was most precious to him. He was a pirate, charting his own course, and the open sea beckoned. The news of the USJ incident, and particularly the bizarre intervention of the Black Pearl and its spectral crew, spread like wildfire through the highest echelons of hero society. While the official reports were carefully sanitized, omitting details of undead pirates and symbol of peace planking, the whispers and unofficial accounts were far more vivid. It wasn't long before the Hero Public Safety Commission (HPSC) president got wind of the full, unfiltered truth. The next morning, the mood in the UA faculty lounge was grim. All Might, still nursing his side, sat beside Principal Nezu, Eraserhead, Present Mike, and the rest of the top heroes. Whiteboards were covered in diagrams, possible routes Izuku's ship could take, and theories about his impossible quirk. "We need to consider all angles," Nezu stated, his paw tapping a pen. His ability to summon and control these entities, coupled with their apparent invulnerability, makes him an unprecedented threat or asset. "Our priority is to secure him and understand this phenomenon." "He's just a kid," Nezu, All Might countered, a troubled look on his face. "A very angry, very confused kid. He said we took his dream. And we did, in a way. He kicked you off a boat," All Might, Eraserhead reminded him dryly, though even he looked perplexed. "And his crew just assaulted our staff. This isn't a conversation about dreams. This is a matter of public safety. We believe he might be heading towards the abandoned shipyards on the coast," Present Mike offered, pointing to a map. "We could intercept him there with a concentrated force." Before he could finish, the double doors to the faculty lounge burst open with a resounding thwack. Standing in the doorway, radiating an aura of barely contained fury, was the HPSC president. Her sharp suit was impeccably tailored, her expression a thundercloud. Accompanying her were two stern-faced pro-heroes, their presence indicating the seriousness of her unscheduled visit. The entire room fell silent. Even All Might straightened up. "Principal Nezu," the president began, her voice low and dangerously calm, "I just received a highly disturbing report regarding the USJ incident. A report that included an unsanctioned detainment of a civilian, and the subsequent activation of an unknown, uncontrolled power within the heart of your institution." She stepped further into the room, her gaze sweeping over the assembled heroes, resting pointedly on All Might and then Eraserhead. "I understand you have taken the mother of this boy, Izuku Midoriya, into custody, without proper HPSC authorization, to use her as bait. Her voice was laced with icy contempt. Nezu steepled his paws. President, with all due respect, the situation was unprecedented. A seemingly quirkless civilian commanding an army of invulnerable spectral beings, directly interfering with a major villain attack, and showing aggressive tendencies towards our symbol of peace, warranted immediate and decisive action. We needed to bring him in for questioning and assessment for the safety of all. The president slammed a hand onto the conference table, making everyone flinch. Unprecedented does not mean unlawful. You risked a civilian's life by luring her son back, and you provoked a conflict that resulted in an attack on UA property by whatever that boy is controlling. Her eyes blazed. Do you have any idea the international incident this could become if word of ghosts and civilian hero conflicts gets out? She took a deep breath, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I am here to deliver a direct order from the Hero Public Safety Commission. You will cease all pursuit of Izuku Midoriya and the Black Pearl. You will stand down your forces. You will not engage him again. All Might started to protest, but, President, he's dangerous. And we don't understand his abilities. He is a minor, without a license, who has demonstrated an unconventional ability to defend himself and others, the president interrupted, cutting him off sharply. His actions at the USJ, while reckless, ultimately aided in repelling the villains and preventing the Nomu's escape. He retrieved his mother. He has shown no intent to cause widespread harm, only to protect what he deems his own. Her gaze hardened, sweeping over each hero in the room. The commission will handle this. We will initiate our own, sanctioned, investigation into Izuku Midoriya and his vessel. Until then, UA. I will stand down. Is that clear, Principal Nezu? Nezu, for once, looked utterly deflated. Crystal clear, President. The president's order hung heavy in the air, leaving the faculty stunned and frustrated. The hunt for Izuku Midoriya and the Black Pearl was over, at least for them. But the questions, the mystery, had only just begun. The heavy doors of the faculty lounge clicked shut, silencing the lingering echoes of the HPSC president's furious decree. The air remained thick with tension, a potent mix of frustration and bewildered awe. All Might, his muscular form still present, slowly sank into a chair, rubbing his aching side. Eraserhead had pinched the bridge of his nose, and Present Mike looked like he wanted to scream. Unbelievable, Present Mike finally burst out, running a hand through his spiky hair. She just ordered us to stand down. After all that, it's a direct order from the Hero Public Safety Commission, Principal Nezu stated, his voice devoid of its usual cheer. He stared intently at the closed doors, his small paws clasped before him. They hold ultimate authority in matters of hero deployment and public safety. We have no choice but to comply. All Might pushed himself up, his brow furrowed with deep concern. But Principal, he began, his voice low and earnest, this Izuku Midoriya, he's a grave unknown. We saw what he's capable of. The sheer power to control those entities, the fact that Aizawa couldn't even erase it. And he's just a child who just assaulted UA property and injured a pro-hero. We cannot simply allow him to sail off into the sunset without consequence. What if he falls into the wrong hands? What if he decides to become a villain? He gestured vehemently towards the window, as if he could still see the Black Pearl retreating into the horizon. We must continue our pursuit. He needs guidance, training, containment even, for the sake of society. My instincts as the symbol of peace tell me we cannot let this go. Nezu turned, his eyes fixed on All Might, a rare solemnity in their depths. All Might, he said, his voice surprisingly firm, I understand your apprehension. Your instincts are usually impeccable. However, the president's order was unequivocal. And there is a practical element to consider. He paused, letting his words sink in. Aizawa's discovery that Izuku's abilities are not a quirk changes everything. We are dealing with something outside the known parameters of our hero society. To continue a direct confrontation, especially after antagonizing him by detaining his mother, would only escalate the situation further. We lack understanding, and thus, we lack the appropriate tools or strategies to engage him without potentially causing catastrophic public panic or pushing him towards genuine hostility. Nezu walked over to the whiteboard, erasing the hastily drawn pursuit routes. The commission has explicitly stated they will handle the investigation. Whether this means observation, negotiation, or something more unconventional is now their purview. Our hands are tied. He looked at the frustrated faces of his faculty. Furthermore, Nezu continued, consider the public perception. We, UA, just had our most secure facility breached, our faculty assaulted, and our top hero defeated by a civilian on a pirate ship with ghosts. The HPSC is already managing a delicate situation. Any further vigilante actions on our part, especially given the ambiguity of Izuku's abilities, would only undermine our authority in the entire hero system. All Might looked down, his fists clenched, the conflict evident on his face. He knew Nezu was right, logically. But his hero's heart screamed at the thought of such an unpredictable force left unsupervised. We must comply, Nezu reiterated, his voice leaving no room for argument. For now, our focus returns to our students and reinforcing our security. Izuku Midoriya is no longer UA's problem to solve directly. The faculty lounge was filled with a heavy silence, punctuated only by the distant sounds of UA. Returning to some semblance of normal. The Black Pearl and its enigmatic captain had sailed away, leaving behind a profound challenge to everything the heroes thought they knew. Days turned into a week. The Black Pearl had sailed far from the Japanese coastline, its new, expanded crew, Izuku and his mother, Inko, adjusting to life on the open sea. Inko, though still a little overwhelmed by the sheer fantastical nature of her son's new reality, was slowly finding her sea legs. Izuku, meanwhile, was diligently studying old nautical charts found aboard the ship, his mind buzzing with possibilities and the unsettling knowledge that the Hero Public Safety Commission, HPSC, was now looking for him. He knew their pursuit wouldn't be as direct as UA's. The HPSC played a different game, a more subtle, insidious one. He spent hours on deck, watching the horizon, his hand instinctively going to the wooden compass around his neck, wondering what his next move should be. He didn't have to wonder for long. One afternoon, a sleek, unmarked drone, unlike any civilian model, silently approached the Black Pearl. It hovered just above the mainmast, its sensors undoubtedly scanning every inch of the ancient vessel. Izuku gripped his rusted cutlass, and the undead crew, sensing the potential threat, began to shimmer into existence around the ship's perimeter. Then, a voice, calm and clear, resonated from the drone's speakers. It was modulated, devoid of emotion, but unmistakably female. Attention, Captain Izuku Midoriya. This is the Hero Public Safety Commission. We are not here to apprehend you. Izuku narrowed his eyes, skeptical. Then what do you want? He called out, his voice echoing across the water. The drone continued, its tone unwavering. We wish to open a dialogue. A calm, rational negotiation regarding your unique abilities and their potential integration into hero society. We believe direct confrontation would be unproductive for all parties involved. Izuku scoffed. You sent All Might and a whole hero school after me. You used my mother as bait. Those actions were taken by UA. Not the Commission's direct order, the drone stated, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in its tone suggesting a hint of reproof directed at the heroes. We have since intervened and commanded them to cease pursuit. Your mother is safe and has expressed her desire for a peaceful resolution. Izuku glanced at Inko, who stood nervously by the mast, clutching her hands. He knew she'd want peace. He also knew better than to trust a voice from a hovering machine. What kind of negotiation? Izuku demanded, keeping his hand on his cutlass. The undead captain materialized fully beside him, its hollow eyes fixed on the drone. The drone hovered lower, projecting a crisp, holographic image onto the deck, the stern, unyielding face of the HPSC president. Izuku Midoriya, the president's holographic image stated, her voice now direct and authoritative, your actions at the USJ, while highly unorthodox, demonstrated an undeniable effectiveness. Your ability to command non-quirk-based entities is unprecedented and invaluable. Traditional heroes operate within known parameters. You, however, exist outside them. This makes you a unique asset. She paused, her holographic eyes seeming to bore into Izuku's. The Commission is prepared to offer you a position. A special designation within the Hero Public Safety Commission. You would operate under our direct supervision, with resources and support tailored to your particular talents. You would be given a clear mandate, a purpose, and a legal framework for your unique contribution to public safety. Izuku stared at the glowing image, his mind reeling. A job, with the HPSC. After everything, you would be a hero, the president continued, her voice holding a persuasive edge. Not a traditional hero, perhaps, but a hero nonetheless. With the full backing of the commission, you would have the opportunity to use your abilities for the greater good, under controlled conditions, avoiding the very incidents that have led us to this conversation. Think of the stability you could bring, the villains you could stop, the lives you could save, in a way no one else can. The offer hung in the air, a tempting, terrifying proposition. The dream he'd once pursued, twisted and reshaped, now presented to him by the very system that had once rejected him. But at what cost? And what did the HPSC truly want with a boy and his ghost ship? The holographic image of the HPSC president flickered and vanished from the deck of the Black Pearl, leaving only the gentle lapping of waves against the hull and the vast expanse of the open sea. The drone hummed for a moment longer, then silently turned and retreated, leaving Izuku and Inko alone with the weight of the proposition. The undead crew had faded back into the ship's timbers, leaving a strange quiet in their wake. Izuku remained at the helm, his hand still resting on the wheel, but his gaze was distant, lost in thought. Inko Midoriya, who had been clinging to the mast throughout the eerie exchange, slowly made her way over to her son. She looked at him, her eyes soft with concern, but also with a newfound, quiet strength. Life on the Black Pearl, however brief, had already changed her too. Izuku, she began, her voice gentle, that was, quite an offer. Izuku sighed, running a hand through his damp green hair. They want to put me on a leash, Mom. Control what I do. Tell me where to go, who to fight. It's the hero life I always wanted, but it doesn't feel right. Not after everything. He thought of All Might's words, his desperate swing of the cutlass, the taste of freedom on the open water. They said they'd give me a special designation, he continued, resources, support. A legal framework. They called me a unique asset. He scoffed, a bitter sound. They just want to study me, control me, so I don't cause any more trouble for their hero society. Inko nodded slowly. That's certainly a possibility, dear. They are powerful people, and they deal with powerful quirks. This is something new to them. She paused, then placed a hand gently on his arm. But consider the alternative, Izuku. What is our life now? Sailing endlessly, running from the authorities. You brought me here, onto this ship, to keep me safe. But how long can we truly stay ahead of them? The HPSC isn't UA. Hi, they have far more reach. Izuku looked out at the shimmering ocean. Captain Jack, he never ran. He always found a way to outsmart them. Captain Jack isn't here right now, is he? Inko said softly, and he wasn't running with his elderly mother aboard. A faint, nervous smile touched her lips. I love this ship, Izuku, and I love being with you. But it's a very big world. And very dangerous. She gestured around the deck, to the weathered wood, the worn ropes. They offered you a chance to use your abilities, truly use them, without being hunted. To be a hero, in your own way, with their backing. You always wanted to save people, didn't you? To protect. This could be a path to that. Izuku walked to the ship's railing, gazing at the endless horizon. But at what cost, Mom? What if they don't care about the good I can do, only about the power? What if they just lock me away when they've learned enough? His mind raced, calculating risks, plotting escape routes, just as he used to analyze hero fights. That's a risk, yes, Inko conceded, stepping beside him. But what if it's also a chance? A chance to finally be understood, to have guidance, to have resources that could truly help people. A chance for me to stop worrying quite so much about my only son being a wanted vigilante on a ghost ship. She chuckled, a watery sound. She reached out and gently touched the wooden compass hanging from his neck. This compass, Izuku, Jack told you it points to what you truly desire. What does it point to now? Izuku looked down at the compass. Its needle, usually twitching erratically, seemed to be vibrating with a new, subtle energy, pointing vaguely forward, towards the unknown. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath of the salty air. freedom, adventure, but also the desire to protect, the yearning to make a difference, the part of him that still, despite everything, wanted to be a hero. Could he truly do that, running forever on the fringes? Or was the best way to change the system, to navigate the dangers from within? The ocean breeze ruffled his hair as he opened his eyes. The choice was terrifying, but it was his. The black pearl drifted on the gentle swells, the morning sun painting the ocean in hues of gold and sapphire. Izuku stood on the deck, the weight of the HPSC president's offer heavy on his mind. He'd spent the night tossing and turning, the image of his mother's worried face battling with his ingrained desire for freedom and the hero dream he thought was long dead. Inko, sensing his internal struggle, remained quiet, letting him wrestle with his decision. She knew her son. He wouldn't just agree, he'd have conditions. Finally, Izuku took a deep breath, the salty air filling his lungs. He walked to the ship's comms console, an old, surprisingly functional piece of tech Jack had jury-rigged years ago. He found the frequency the drone had used. "This is the Black Pearl," Izuku stated, his voice clear and resolute. "This is Izuku Midoriya. I've considered your offer." There was a moment of static, then the familiar, modulated voice of the HPSC drone. "Go on, Captain Midoriya." "I'll accept," Izuku began, his grip tightening on the console. "But on my terms." A pause on the other end. "State your terms." "First," Izuku declared, a flash of Captain Jack's audacious spirit igniting within him, "I operate by my own rules. You can give me missions, but how I accomplish them, and where I go, is my prerogative. No direct orders on tactics, no mandatory training regimens that conflict with my ship's needs, and absolutely no analysis, or containment, of my abilities or my crew without my express consent." Another long silence from the drone. Izuku could practically feel the HPSC president's analytical mind working through his demands. He knew it was a bold play, perhaps even reckless, but he wouldn't compromise his newfound autonomy. "You expect to work with the Commission, yet dictate your operational parameters." The president's voice finally returned, a hint of steel in its tone. "I bring a unique asset to the table," Izuku retorted, looking out at the endless ocean. "An asset you've already acknowledged as unprecedented and invaluable. You want results. I want freedom. We help each other, but I don't become your dog." He paused, then added another condition, one that came from the depths of his long-held hero aspirations. "And I work for the people, not just for the Commission's political agenda. If a situation arises where people are in danger, I act. Whether it's on your mission list or not." A strained silence hung in the air. Izuku braced himself for rejection, for a renewed pursuit. But he wouldn't back down. This was his chance to be a hero on his own terms, or not at all. Finally, the president's voice returned, carrying an audible, albeit subtle, sigh of exasperation. "Captain Midoriya," she said, the modulation in her voice almost failing to hide her surprise, "your demands are highly irregular. However, the Commission acknowledges the unique circumstances. Given your demonstrated effectiveness at the USJ, and the unconventional nature of your operational capabilities, we are prepared to accept your conditions," the president stated. "You will receive mission briefings, targets, and intelligence. You will operate with HPSC clearance, minimizing conflict with other hero agencies. But your tactical execution, and the handling of your crew, will remain at your discretion, provided you do not violate established laws or pose an undue risk to public safety." Izuku's eyes widened slightly. He had done it. They had actually agreed. "Welcome aboard, Captain Midoriya," the president's voice concluded. "We will send your first assignment and communication protocols shortly. And a formal, non-negotiable request for you to provide a more suitable contact method than yelling at a drone." The drone hummed, then zipped away, disappearing into the vast sky. Izuku stood there, stunned, then a slow, triumphant grin spread across his face. He looked at Inko, who offered him a trembling but proud smile. He had a job, a hero job, on his own terms. The Black Pearl was no longer a vessel of escape, but a ship of sanctioned, albeit highly unconventional, operations. The world of heroes had just gotten a whole lot stranger. The news, as always, traveled through the hero world faster than All Might in his prime. Despite the HPSC president's stern directive for UA High to stand down from the pursuit of Izuku Midoriya and the Black Pearl, the faculty remained on high alert. They continued to hold hushed, unofficial discussions about the boy, the ship, and the bizarre, non-quirk abilities he commanded. Principal Nezu, ever the strategist, had ordered enhanced surveillance of coastal areas and remote zones, convinced that even if UA couldn't act, they still needed to know. Eraserhead, though outwardly stoic, spent hours reviewing old files on obscure phenomena and urban legends, a nagging feeling telling him this went beyond any known quirk. It was Momo Yaoyorozu who inadvertently stumbled upon the first concrete clue. As a representative of her family's influential company, she occasionally had access to highly specialized, private hero communication networks, often used for classified material requisitions or secure intel transfers between top agencies. She was assisting Power Loader with a complex material order for the Hero Course's advanced support gear when she saw it. Buried within a series of encrypted requisition requests for highly experimental marine-grade stealth plating and advanced, long-range drone technology, was a subtle, almost imperceptible code. It was a commission-level project designation, far above the typical UA clearances. Curious, Momo, with her exceptional analytical mind, began cross-referencing. The project wasn't listed on any publicly accessible hero databases. Her brows furrowed as she noticed the project's unusual specifications: a focus on deep-sea reconnaissance, stealth tracking of non-standard vessels, and, most puzzlingly, a line item for non-lethal containment measures for ethereal entities. It was vague, but unsettlingly specific. Later that day, Tenya Iida, ever diligent, overheard snippets of an unusually agitated conversation between Present Mike and Midnight in the faculty hall. "Did you hear the whispers?" Mike's voice was a frantic whisper itself. "They're saying that kid, Midoriya, the HPSC actually hired him. After everything he did, it's just a rumor." "Mike," Midnight replied, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. "The commission doesn't just hire vigilantes, especially not ones who, well, planked All Might." "But think about it," Mike insisted. "Nezu's been acting even more cryptic than usual, and All Might's been in a mood all week. And those strange tech requests Momo was looking at. It all fits the pattern for a special designation project, something they'd want kept under wraps." The pieces began to click into place for Iida, who quickly relayed what he heard to his classmates. The information spread like wildfire among the students, reaching Katsuki Bakugo last, as always. Bakugo, who had been trying to ignore the entire Deku on a pirate ship incident, finally snapped when Kirishima excitedly and foolishly mentioned it to him. "So, like, Midoriya's a secret agent now. Like a pirate hero. That's so manly." Kirishima grinned. Bakugo froze. "What? The HPSC hired Deku?" His voice was a guttural roar that made the entire common room fall silent. "They hired that quirkless idiot after he trashed the USJ and kicked All Might's ass. But they told us to stand down." His face contorted in a mixture of disbelief and explosive rage. The news, undeniable now that it was coming directly from Bakugo's outraged confirmation, filtered up to the UA faculty. They had suspected something was amiss, but to confirm the HPSC had not only stopped their pursuit but had actively recruited Izuku Midoriya, the boy with the ghost crew, was a bitter pill to swallow. The very institution that governed Hero Society had essentially given a stamp of approval to the most unconventional, unquantifiable, and utterly baffling hero they had ever encountered. It was a profound challenge to everything they stood for, leaving the heroes of UA with more questions than answers about the future of their world. Months passed. The initial shock and bewilderment at UA High eventually settled into a tense, unspoken acceptance of the HPSC's decision. While the faculty might grumble about the pirate hero and the lack of transparency, the Hero Public Safety Commission held firm. Izuku Midoriya and the Black Pearl officially became a classified asset, a ghost ship operating on the fringes of Hero Society, responding to missions that required an unconventional touch. Izuku, in turn, had adapted to his new life. The Black Pearl became his home, and the vast ocean his domain. He still practiced with his rusted cutlass, growing surprisingly proficient, and learned to seamlessly command his undead crew. The HPSC sent cryptic communiques and coordinates for targets, villain cells operating beyond typical hero jurisdiction, impossible extractions, or threats that conventional quirks couldn't counter. Each mission was a test, and each success solidified his strange, new role. He wasn't fighting for rankings or fame, but for the thrill of the chase, the satisfaction of protecting others, and the bizarre freedom he'd found. He maintained minimal contact, reporting only what was necessary, ensuring he upheld his end of the bargain, operational autonomy. Then came the Hosu incident. News reports, initially fragmented, quickly escalated into a terrifying picture. The hero killer, Stain, had resurfaced, his brutal ideology escalating into widespread chaos. Nomu, those grotesque bioweapons, were rampaging through the city, drawing the attention of every available pro-hero. But Stain was the true target, a blight on the hero system that the HPSC desperately wanted removed. Deep in the privacy of the Black Pearl's captain's quarters, a holographic projector flickered to life. The stern face of the HPSC president appeared, her expression even more unyielding than usual. "Captain Midoriya," she began, her voice devoid of pleasantries. "Current intelligence indicates a major crisis in Hosu City. Nomu attacks are widespread, but our primary concern is the hero killer, Stain. His actions are severely undermining public trust in heroes. He's a symbol, and symbols must be dealt with decisively." Izuku listened, a grim expression on his face. He'd read about Stain, analyzed his quirk and methods. The man was terrifyingly effective. "Conventional heroes are currently overwhelmed with the Nomu," the president continued. "And Stain's quirk and combat prowess make him exceptionally difficult to apprehend by traditional means. His targeting of specific heroes also complicates direct engagement." Her eyes, usually cold and calculating, held a glint of absolute resolve. "This is your mission, Captain Midoriya. Your unique assets make you the ideal choice for this engagement. You will proceed to Hosu City." She paused, her gaze hardening. "Your objective is the hero killer, Stain. Bring him in, dead or alive." Izuku's eyes widened slightly. Dead or alive, it was a cold, brutal command. His missions so far had been about incapacitation, retrieval, or disruption. This was different. This was an execution order, veiled as an apprehension. His continued existence poses an unacceptable risk to the public and the hero structure, the president stated, her voice unwavering. "This is not a hero's mission, Captain. This is an HPSC mandate. You are uniquely equipped to bypass his quirk and neutralize him. We trust your discretion in the method, as per our agreement, but the outcome is non-negotiable." The holographic image flickered and vanished, leaving Izuku alone with the weight of the command. The wind howled softly outside the porthole, mirroring the turmoil in his mind. He was a hero on his own terms, yes, but this was a demand from the very top, a dark task that pushed the boundaries of his self-imposed rules. He walked out onto the deck, gazing at the distant horizon. Hosu City, Stain, dead or alive. The wooden compass around his neck vibrated faintly, its needle pointing not to treasure, but to a dark, moral precipice. "All right, Pearl," Izuku muttered, gripping the helm. "Set course for Hosu." The Black Pearl cut through the night, leaving a phosphorescent trail in its wake as it approached the burning skyline of Hosu City. Sirens wailed, and the distant explosions of Nomu attacks painted the sky in an angry orange glow. Izuku stood at the helm, the rusted cutlass heavy at his hip, the weight of the HPSC's, dead or alive, order pressing down on him. He had spent the voyage wrestling with the command. Dead or alive, it went against every fiber of his being, every ideal he'd ever held about heroism. But he also knew the pragmatism of the HPSC, and the danger Stain represented. He wasn't just a villain, he was a twisted idealist who inspired others to violence. He needed to be stopped. "All right, crew," Izuku murmured, his voice grim. "Let's find the monster." He navigated the Black Pearl with uncanny precision, bringing it into a deserted, fire-licked canal that snaked through the ravaged city. The ship, with its spectral crew now subtly manifesting on deck, was a chilling sight against the backdrop of urban decay. As the ship drew closer to the heart of the chaos, Izuku saw it, a tangle of alleyways, flickering streetlights, and the distinct gleam of blades. He recognized the figures from his copious research. Ingenium, pinned to a wall, already bleeding. Native, an obscure hero, incapacitated, and in the center of it all, a dark, menacing silhouette. The hero killer, Stain. He was a blur of motion, his katana flashing against a desperate Shoto Todoroki. Izuku also spotted Tenya Iida, still pinned, frozen in terror and rage. This wasn't a mission for subtlety anymore. "Prepare for boarding," Izuku yelled, his voice cutting through the urban din. "Crew, engage the target." With an unearthly shriek of grating bones, the undead pirates poured off the Black Pearl, phasing through walls and debris, a silent, terrifying tide flowing into the alleyway. Stain, focused intently on Todoroki, suddenly found himself surrounded by intangible, glowing skeletons. Stain, with his incredible reaction time and combat prowess, spun, his eyes widening slightly at the impossible sight. He lashed out with his katana, but the blade passed harmlessly through the chest of the lead skeleton. Before he could process the anomaly, a bony fist, imbued with unsettling force, slammed into his side, knocking the wind out of him. "What in the?" Stain growled, stumbling back. He tried to lick the blood, but there was no cut to create the paralysis. His quirk was useless. Izuku, meanwhile, sprinted into the alley, drawing his rusted cutlass. He wasn't going for a direct fight, he was going for the objective. He saw Stain momentarily overwhelmed, parrying blows from multiple directions from enemies he couldn't touch. "Go for his joints. Immobilize him," Izuku shouted to his crew, his voice sharp and clear amidst the chaos. The skeletons, unnervingly intelligent, began targeting Stain's knees, elbows, and shoulders, their blows jarring and disorienting him. Stain, a master of combat, was being pushed to his absolute limits. He was fast, deadly, but completely unprepared for opponents who didn't bleed, couldn't be cut, and whose attacks caused internal shock without external wounds. He was forced to focus on dodging the relentless, silent barrage, leaving him vulnerable. Seeing his opening, Izuku moved. He didn't have super speed, but he had uncanny agility honed by months on the Black Pearl. He darted in, not for a killing blow, but to disarm. Stain, distracted by a skeleton phasing through his chest, didn't see Izuku coming. With a practiced swing, Izuku brought his rusted cutlass down, not at Stain, but at the flat of his katana. The unexpected blow, combined with the skeletal attacks, was enough. Stain's grip faltered, and his prized katana clattered to the ground. Before Stain could retrieve it, the undead captain, its movements eerily fluid, lunged. It didn't strike. Instead, its long, bony fingers, surprisingly nimble, seized Stain's wrists, pinning them with unnatural strength. Other skeletons moved in, securing his legs, holding him in an unbreakable grip. Stain struggled, roared, even tried to lick the skeletons, but his quirk had no effect on the unliving. Izuku stood panting, his cutlass lowered. Stain, the feared hero killer, was captured. Completely, utterly helpless, held by a force he couldn't comprehend. Todoroki, having witnessed the impossible sight, slowly rose from his defensive stance, his eyes wide with disbelief. Iida, still partially immobilized but now free of immediate danger, stared, his jaw slack. Izuku looked at Stain, held captive by his spectral crew. The "dead or alive" order echoed in his mind. He had him, but he couldn't kill him. Not like this, not ever. He took a deep breath, the fumes of smoke and the tang of blood filling his nostrils. "Send a message to the HPSC, Izuku said, his voice firm, addressing the unseen drone he knew was surely observing. "Stain is apprehended, alive." He then turned to Todoroki and Iida. "Someone call for medical and hero backup. And maybe an exorcist." The Black Pearl made its way towards the secure, coastal docks reserved for top-tier hero agencies and government operations. The air shimmered with energy from hidden force fields, and the presence of heavily armed pro-heroes, their expressions a mix of awe and trepidation, confirmed they were at the Hero Public Safety Commission (HPSC) headquarters. News of Stain's apprehension, and the impossible circumstances surrounding it, had undoubtedly raced ahead of Izuku. He could feel the weight of countless eyes on him as the Black Pearl silently glided into its designated berth. On the deck, Stain remained bound, held in an unyielding, ethereal grip by several undead pirates. He snarled and struggled, his eyes blazing with fury, but the spectral chains held firm. His capture, however, was clearly not what the HPSC had anticipated. As the gangplank extended, a small, stern-faced woman in an immaculate HPSC uniform, flanked by 2 burly agents, stepped forward. She carried a sleek tablet in one hand. "Captain Midoriya," she stated, her voice crisp, devoid of warmth. "Mission successful, it seems. Though not precisely to specification." Izuku, his face grim, nodded towards Stain. "He's alive, as per my discretion." The agent's eyes narrowed imperceptibly, but she didn't argue. Instead, she gestured to her accompanying agents. "Secure the target." The HPSC agents approached cautiously, their expressions wary as they reached for Stain. The undead pirates, with a silent, synchronized movement, released their grip on the hero killer. Stain, unbound, immediately lunged, but was swiftly incapacitated by the HPSC agents, who moved with practiced efficiency, securing him in specialized restraints. As Stain was whisked away, presumably to a high-security holding facility, the HPSC agent turned back to Izuku. "The Commission acknowledges your successful apprehension of the hero killer, Stain," she said, her voice robotic. "Your methods were unique, but effective. This concludes your assignment." She then pulled a small, sealed envelope from her jacket pocket. "As per standard HPSC protocol for successful, high-value missions, here is your remuneration." She extended the envelope towards Izuku. He took it, his brow furrowed in confusion. It felt light, almost insignificant. He opened it, and inside lay a crisp, neatly folded bill. It was 5,000 yen. Izuku stared at the bill, then back at the agent, utterly dumbfounded. 5,000 yen, he repeated, his voice incredulous. For capturing the hero killer, Stain. The man who nearly tore down hero society and had every hero scrambling. The agent's expression remained perfectly neutral. "That is the standard payment for a successful solo apprehension of a Class A target, Captain Midoriya. The Commission evaluates missions on a fixed scale, regardless of extenuating circumstances." She emphasized the last 2 words, a subtle jab at his refusal to kill Stain. "Your independent operational parameters mean you do not receive a standard hero salary or benefits package. This is a per-mission fee." Izuku slowly folded the bill, a mix of disbelief and growing amusement bubbling within him. He had just confronted a notorious serial killer, saved lives, navigated treacherous cityscapes on a ghost ship, faced down the HPSC president's chilling, dead or alive, order, and his reward was barely enough for a decent meal. He looked at the impassive HPSC agent, then out at the gleaming, futuristic headquarters, and finally back at his ancient, weathered black pearl. A slow, wry grin spread across his face. This was truly the HPSC's way of reminding him of his place, of the vast difference between his pirate hero status and their rigid system. "Right," Izuku chuckled, tucking the yen into his pocket. "Well, thank you for the generous compensation. Always good to know where I stand." He turned, walking back towards his ship. "Come on, Mom," he called out to Inko, who was observing the scene with wide, bewildered eyes. "Looks like we're still on a budget for our next adventure." As the Black Pearl prepared to set sail, leaving the gleaming HPSC headquarters behind, Izuku couldn't help but wonder what bizarre mission the Commission would send him on next, and what ridiculously small sum it would be worth. The Black Pearl had sailed to a quiet, secluded cove, its ancient timbers humming softly in the gentle ocean breeze. Izuku was meticulously cleaning his rusted cutlass, the meager 5,000 yen for capturing Stain still sitting oddly in his pocket. His mother, Inko, was surprisingly enjoying the simpler, if stranger, life at sea, even learning to tie a few basic knots. A flash of light on the horizon caught Izuku's eye. It wasn't a hero patrol, nor a villainous vessel. It was a sleek, high-speed HPSC hydrofoil, its advanced engines barely disturbing the water. He braced himself, wondering what ludicrously undervalued mission awaited him now. The hydrofoil pulled alongside the Black Pearl. On its deck stood the HPSC president, her usual stern demeanor softened by a rare, almost imperceptible air of calculation. Beside her stood a tall, striking woman with long, braided hair and piercing eyes, a sniper rifle integrated into her arm. Lady Nagant, the former top hero, now a notorious ex-con. Izuku's eyes widened. He knew of Lady Nagant, a hero turned villain, incarcerated after a terrible incident. Her quirk, rifle, was terrifyingly precise. "Captain Midoriya," the president called out, her voice crisp across the water. "I have a new asset for your crew. Lady Nagant's gaze was cold, assessing, as she stepped onto the Black Pearl's gangplank, a subtle clatter of bones signaling the materialization of a few undead pirates near Izuku, ready for any threat. Lady Nagant, the president continued, has been granted a conditional release. Her unique talents, while once misused, are invaluable. She has agreed to serve under your command, Captain. Her expertise in long-range engagement will complement your unconventional combat style. Nagant's eyes flicked to Izuku, then to the semi-transparent figures of his skeletal crew. A flicker of surprise crossed her face, quickly masked. My terms are simple, Captain, she stated, her voice gravelly. I follow orders. I use my quirk. I serve my time. No unnecessary heroics. No sermons. Izuku looked from Nagant to the president. This was a test, a way to integrate a problematic asset, and perhaps to further monitor him. But it was also an opportunity. Nagant was incredibly powerful and experienced. Her skills would be a massive advantage, far more useful than 5,000 yen. He weighed the risks. Nagant was a former villain, capable of great harm. But she was being offered to him by the HPSC itself, under their supposed watch. And he remembered Jack's lessons about assessing a person's spirit, regardless of their past. Nagant, despite her reputation, carried herself with a weary resignation, not malicious intent. President, Izuku called back, his voice firm, my crew operates by my rules. If Lady Nagant joins, she's under my command. No strings attached from the commission beyond this initial agreement. And she gets to choose her own targets on missions I accept. The president's lips thinned, a hint of annoyance. Her parole dictates she operates solely under commission direction, Captain. And my terms dictate operational autonomy, Izuku retorted. If she's my crew, she operates under my rules, within the mission parameters I agree to. She's either fully aboard, or she stays with you. A tense silence stretched between the hydrofoil and the Black Pearl. Lady Nagant watched Izuku with a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. Perhaps respect for his stubbornness. Very well, Captain Midoriya, the president finally conceded, her voice tight with forced compliance. Lady Nagant will operate under your immediate command. Her parole terms will be amended to reflect this unique arrangement. Izuku nodded, a triumphant glint in his eyes. Welcome aboard, Lady Nagant. Nagant merely gave a curt nod. She turned to the HPSC hydrofoil. You can leave now. The president gave a final, piercing look at Izuku, then nodded to her hydrofoil pilot. The sleek vessel peeled away, leaving Lady Nagant standing alone on the deck of the Black Pearl, her massive sniper rifle arm gleaming in the sun. Izuku watched the hydrofoil disappear. He now had a legendary sniper as part of his motley crew. The game just got a lot more interesting. Months flowed like the tides, bringing new missions, new challenges, and a strange sort of normalcy to life aboard the Black Pearl. Lady Nagant, surprisingly, integrated well into the unconventional crew. Her stoic demeanor remained, but Izuku found her to be fiercely professional and surprisingly insightful. She quickly grasped the eerie capabilities of the undead pirates, leveraging their intangibility to scout or create diversions for her pinpoint shots. Inko, for her part, formed a quiet bond with Nagant, finding a kindred spirit in the battle-hardened woman. Izuku's operations for the HPSC grew increasingly complex. He dismantled black markets operating on remote islands, disrupted villain networks in international waters, and even recovered sensitive data from sunken ships. The paltry 5,000 yen for Stain had become a running joke, but the HPSC's reliance on the Black Pearl was undeniable. They were using him for the dirty work, the impossible tasks, the missions that needed an unquirked, unheroic solution. Then came the seismic shockwaves that reached even the far-flung stretches of the ocean. News broadcasts, crackling with static over the Black Pearl's antiquated radio, painted a horrifying picture. Camino Ward was under attack. An unprecedented gathering of villains, led by the League of Villains, culminating in the terrifying resurgence of All for One. The air around the Black Pearl grew heavy. Izuku felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. This wasn't just another villain. This was the ultimate evil, the shadow that had haunted All Might for decades. As if on cue, the familiar holographic projector on the captain's table flickered to life. The HPSC president appeared, her face etched with a gravity Izuku had never seen before. Her eyes, usually so calculating, now held a glint of desperation. "Captain Midoriya," she began, her voice devoid of its usual controlled composure, edged with a raw urgency. "Reports confirm All for One has revealed himself in Kamino Ward. He is currently engaging All Might and multiple top heroes." Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs. "All Might, fighting him. Our intelligence indicates All for One's quirk is unique. He can steal and grant quirks, and he possesses a vast arsenal of stolen powers. Conventional methods are proving insufficient to contain him," the president continued, her gaze direct and unblinking. "He is a threat to the very fabric of our society, an anomaly that cannot be allowed to persist." She leaned forward, her holographic image seeming to loom over Izuku. "This is it, Captain. The most critical mission the Commission has ever issued. All for One's quirk makes him almost untouchable by normal means. He nullifies powers, reflects attacks, warps space. But you don't operate by normal means." Izuku's hand instinctively went to his rusted cutlass, then to the wooden compass around his neck. The compass was spinning wildly, pointing everywhere and nowhere, overwhelmed by the sheer, overwhelming nature of the target. "Your abilities," the president pressed, her voice gaining a chilling edge, "your crew's intangibility, their unique destructive capability, their immunity to conventional quirks, they are the only viable weapon we have against him. This is not about capture, Captain. This is beyond that." Her final words hung in the air, cold and definitive. "Your mission, Captain Midoriya, is to kill All for One. Neutralize him by any means necessary. Ensure he is removed from existence, permanently. We will provide all necessary intel and a clear path to the engagement zone. This is the highest priority." The holographic image vanished, leaving Izuku standing in the quiet of his cabin, the distant sounds of Kamino Ward now seeming impossibly loud. Kill All for One, the greatest villain in history. The man who had nearly ended All Might, the symbol of peace. And he, the quirkless boy, was being tasked with his annihilation. He walked out onto the deck, the night air cool against his skin. The city glowed ominously in the distance. He looked at Lady Nagant, her face stoic, and then at his mother, who was now openly trembling. The undead crew began to shimmer, their presence felt, a silent readiness for their captain's command. This wasn't just a mission. This was the defining moment. "All right, Pearl," Izuku said, his voice quiet but resolute, carrying the weight of the impossible task. "Set course for Kamino." The sky above Kamino Ward was a maelstrom of destruction. Buildings crumbled, streets buckled, and the very air shrieked with the clash of titans. All Might, his muscles straining, his form flickering precariously, traded devastating blows with All for One. The villain, a monstrous silhouette cloaked in raw power, effortlessly countered every attack, his stolen quirks manifesting in terrifying displays of force, nullifying One for All's kinetic energy and repelling attacks with invisible barriers. "Give it up, All Might." All for One's voice boomed, chilling and triumphant. "You're at your limit. The symbol of peace will fall tonight." All Might gritted his teeth, his vision blurring. He was fighting not just for his life, but for the future of Hero Society, for everything he believed in. He unleashed a Detroit smash, but All for One absorbed the impact, redirecting it back at him with a sickening crunch. All Might crashed through several buildings, barely conscious. The world watched in horror as their beacon of hope dwindled. Just as All for One prepared a final, crushing blow, a strange, guttural groan, like the deep sigh of the ocean, rippled through the air. The ground beneath the villain's feet seemed to shudder. From the burning ruins of a collapsed factory, a dark, impossible silhouette began to emerge. It wasn't flying, nor was it using a quirk. It was simply sailing. Through the debris, over the rubble, defying all logic, the Black Pearl materialized. Its tattered sails, seemingly undamaged by the inferno, billowed with an unseen wind, and its ancient timbers groaned as it moved. On its deck, illuminated by the city's inferno, stood Izuku Midoriya. His face was grim, determined. Beside him, Lady Nagant stood poised, her integrated rifle arm steady, scanning the battleground. Behind them, faintly shimmering, the spectral forms of the undead crew began to coalesce, their empty eye sockets glowing with an eerie, cold light. All for One, preparing to strike All Might down, paused. His head tilted, sensing an anomaly, something outside his vast understanding of quirks. "What is this?" He rumbled, his voice laced with uncharacteristic confusion. He had seen everything the quirk world could throw at him, but a ghost ship sailing through a city. All Might, battered and bruised, pushed himself up, his eyes widening in disbelief as he saw the familiar vessel, and the figure standing at its helm. Young Midoriya, he wheezed, utterly bewildered. Izuku didn't answer. He raised his rusted cutlass, pointing its tip directly at All for One. His eyes, usually full of analytical wonder, were now blazing with a focused, almost vengeful intent. The compass around his neck vibrated, its needle spinning wildly, pointing not to a specific direction, but to the overwhelming presence of evil before them. "This is it, Pearl," Izuku muttered, his voice resonating with grim resolve. Full engagement. With a silent, terrifying command, the undead pirates poured off the Black Pearl, phasing through the shattered remains of buildings, their numbers seemingly endless. They didn't make a sound, but their spectral presence was palpable, a wave of ancient malevolence sweeping across the battlefield. Lady Nagant, ever professional, took aim. Her rifle arm hummed, charging a powerful shot. She wasn't aiming for a killing blow yet, but for a disruption, a distraction. All for One, who had easily swatted aside every hero quirk, found himself suddenly surrounded by intangible, unyielding forces. A skeletal hand, seemingly phasing through his flesh, connected with a jarring impact, causing him to recoil. Another tried to grab his arm, and while it couldn't physically hold him, the sensation was deeply unsettling, violating his very being. "Impossible," All for One roared, swatting at the spectral figures that moved like smoke around him, his vast array of stolen quirks finding no purchase on their ethereal forms. The tide of the battle, moments ago a tragic conclusion, had just taken an impossible, horrifying, and utterly unpredictable turn. The pirate and his spectral crew had arrived. The battlefield in Kamino Ward was now dominated by an impossible spectacle. All for One, the apex of villainy, roared in frustrated disbelief as the undead pirates swarmed him. His vast arsenal of stolen quirks, kinetic redirection, air cannons, super strength, shock absorption, proved utterly useless against foes he couldn't touch. They phased through his defensive barriers, slipped past his concussive blasts, and delivered jarring blows that, while not physically wounding, disrupted his concentration and left him reeling. All Might, battered and watching from the rubble, could only stare. He had fought All for One countless times, knowing every trick, every stolen power. But this was beyond comprehension. Izuku Midoriya, the quirkless boy, had brought forth an army of the impossible. Lady Nagant, seeing the disruption caused by the spectral onslaught, took her shot. Her integrated rifle arm hummed, and a high-velocity slug, infused with a quirk that allowed it to pierce through dense materials, screamed through the air. It wasn't aimed to kill, but to maim, to disorient. The bullet, precise as ever, tore through All for One's shoulder, causing him to bellow in pain and momentarily drop his guard. "Now, crew," Izuku yelled, his voice cutting through the cacophony. His rusted cutlass gleamed in the flickering light of the burning city. He had analyzed All for One's quirks, even those he only glimpsed. The villain needed to activate his powers. He needed his concentration. As All for One stumbled, distracted by the wound and the relentless, intangible assaults, Izuku launched himself forward. He moved with a speed born of desperation and practiced agility. His target wasn't the villain's body, but the core of his power. Focus his concentration. Disrupt his breathing, Izuku commanded his undead captain, who materialized directly in front of All for One. The spectral pirate plunged its ghostly hand directly into the villain's chest, not for a blow, but to cause a horrifying, internal sensation of choking, of intangible hands grasping at his lungs. All for One gasped, convulsing, his body spasming as he tried to dislodge the unseen tormentor. His vast array of quirks flickered, unable to grasp or counter a threat that existed beyond the physical. His breath caught, his concentration broken. Seeing his opening, Izuku didn't hesitate. He held his rusted cutlass in both hands, bringing it above his head. He infused every ounce of his will, his anger, his determination, into the blade. He thought of all the lives All for One had ruined, of the dreams he had crushed, of the pain he had inflicted on All Might. He thought of his own long-held, denied dream, now manifesting in this impossible way. He brought the cutlass down in a furious, overhand strike. It wasn't a heroic smash, or a powerful explosion. It was a pirate's final, desperate, cunning attack. The rusted blade, imbued with the unseen power of the Black Pearl and its spectral crew, connected with a sickening crack against All for One's skull. It wasn't a normal cut. It was as if the ancient steel, the very essence of the ghost ship, had found a way to wound the unwoundable. The intangibility that protected Izuku's crew had, for a fleeting moment, been transferred to his blade, allowing it to bypass All for One's overwhelming defenses and strike at his very being. All for One's eyes, wide with shock and agony, rolled back in his head. The monstrous, stolen quirks he wielded flickered, then vanished. His massive form swayed, then collapsed with a thundering crash that shook the entire ward. The air, moments ago thick with his terrifying power, became still. Silence descended upon Kamino Ward, broken only by the distant wails of sirens and the crackle of burning buildings. The undead pirates, their mission complete, shimmered and began to dissolve back into the ether, leaving no trace of their existence. Lady Nagant lowered her rifle, her face a mask of disbelief. Izuku stood over the fallen villain, his chest heaving, his cutlass dropping with a clang. All for One, the symbol of evil, the man who had terrorized the world for generations, lay motionless. He hadn't been defeated by a smash, or a blast, or a super-powered punch. He had been slain by a quirkless boy and a phantom crew, with a rusty sword. The wooden compass around Izuku's neck had stopped spinning. Its needle now pointed directly at the motionless form of All for One, then settled, pointing firmly towards the open sea. Time, like the relentless ocean current, flowed onward. The world had grappled with the impossible truth of All for One's demise. The official story, carefully crafted by the HPSC, credited All Might's final, heroic stand, a narrative that allowed society to retain its faith in traditional heroes. But within the highest echelons, and amongst those who witnessed the impossible events in Kamino Ward, the whispers of the Black Pearl and its spectral captain grew. Izuku Midoriya, now a legend in the shadows, continued his work for the HPSC. His missions became even more critical, often involving threats that conventional quirks simply couldn't touch. He and his crew, Lady Nagant, a silent, deadly force, and his ever-supportive mother, Inko, became an indispensable, if entirely unconventional, unit. The undead pirates were his silent, invincible army, and the Black Pearl his mobile headquarters. The HPSC, having witnessed his raw effectiveness, had learned to accept his terms, even if it chafed at their rigid structure. Months after Kamino, a new directive arrived, one that baffled Izuku. He was to attend the Provisional Hero License exam, not as a participant in the initial stages, but as a special case. The message explicitly stated his unique operational parameters required a different assessment. The day of the final stage of the Provisional Hero License exam arrived. Thousands of aspiring heroes from UA and other top schools gathered at a massive, custom-built testing facility, a sprawling urban landscape designed for large-scale rescue and combat simulations. The air crackled with nervous energy and youthful ambition. High above the testing grounds, in a VIP viewing box, sat the HPSC president, her gaze sharp and unyielding. Beside her, to the utter bewilderment of the other exam proctors and even some of the top heroes present, stood Izuku Midoriya. He wore a simple dark jacket, his rusted cutlass at his hip, and the wooden compass around his neck. Behind him, standing silently, was Lady Nagant, her rifle arm resting casually at her side, her presence radiating a quiet menace that made even seasoned pros uneasy. "President," one of the proctors whispered, leaning in, "with all due respect, why is he here?" "And his associate. This is the provisional license exam. It's for students." The president didn't take her eyes off the vast arena below. "Captain Midoriya is here by my direct order. His participation in the final phase of this exam is a special arrangement, designed to assess his capabilities under controlled conditions, and to integrate him into the hero system in a manner that suits his unconventional profile." She turned, her gaze sweeping over the proctors, daring them to question her. "His performance will be evaluated on criteria unique to his operational parameters. He will not be judged by standard quirk-based combat. He will be judged on effectiveness, discretion, and mission completion." The proctors exchanged bewildered glances, but dared not argue. The president's authority was absolute. As the final phase of the exam was about to begin, a booming voice announced the last, unexpected addition to the test. And now, for a special, unannounced scenario in the final phase, we introduce Captain Izuku Midoriya and his crew. A collective gasp rippled through the thousands of students below, including a stunned UA. Class 1A. Bakugo roared in disbelief. All Might, observing from a separate, more discreet viewing area, felt his jaw drop, and Eraserhead simply sighed, rubbing his temples. Down on the testing grounds, a large section of the urban landscape suddenly shifted, revealing a hidden, fortified structure. From within it, a new, more dangerous set of villains, advanced, combat-ready robots and even a few controlled, non-lethal Nomu-like constructs, began to emerge, unleashing simulated chaos. The president gestured towards the unfolding scenario. Captain Midoriya, she said, her voice low and direct, your mission is simple: neutralize all threats within that sector. Minimize collateral damage to the simulated environment. And do so, without being detected by the other examinees for as long as possible. This is your final exam. Show them what a true asset can do. Izuku nodded, a grim smile playing on his lips. This was their way of showing him off, of testing the limits of his unconventional heroics. He looked at Lady Nagant, who gave him a subtle nod. He then closed his eyes, focusing. The wooden compass pulsed, and below them, within the very structure of the testing facility, the faint, chilling sounds of creaking timbers and shifting bones began to echo. Shota Aizawa, a man whose entire philosophy revolved around pragmatism and the cold, hard logic of quirks, was in a state of profound, inward disbelief. He stood in a separate, soundproof observation booth with All Might and Principal Nezu, overseeing the final phase of the Provisional Hero License exam. He'd been meticulously tracking his students' progress, analyzing their every move, when the announcement came. And now, for a special, unannounced scenario. Captain Izuku Midoriya and his crew. Aizawa's eyes, already perpetually tired, widened slightly in a rare display of shock. He felt a familiar knot of frustration tighten in his gut. Midoriya, here, he watched on the monitors as the infamous Black Pearl materialized in the test zone, not as a physical ship, but as a chillingly realistic digital construct within the simulation. Then, Izuku, Lady Nagant, and even his mother, Inko, appeared on the digital deck. Nezu, Aizawa said, his voice flat with barely contained annoyance, what is the meaning of this? Nezu, perched on the console, gave a tiny, almost imperceptible smile. The HPSC president's directive, Aizawa. She believes this is the most effective way to assess Captain Midoriya's unique abilities within a controlled environment. Aizawa's gaze sharpened, his eyes glowing crimson as he watched the monitor that focused on Izuku. He was ready to nullify the quirk again, to see if he could finally get a handle on it. But as he looked, nothing happened. The spectral pirates, now manifesting within the simulated reality, continued to phase through obstacles, their glow unaffected by his quirk. His internal sigh was a weary, familiar one. It was just as he had discovered at the USJ, there was nothing to erase. The HPSC is using our exam as a glorified showcase, Aizawa grumbled, wrapping his capture weapon tighter around his arm. And what about the other students? This isn't fair. Midoriya has an army of, whatever they are. It completely throws off the balance of the test. All Might, who had been watching with an equally stunned expression, now stepped forward, his tone a mix of pride and concern. He's not competing against the students, Aizawa. He's on a separate objective. The goal for the others is to avoid his sector and continue with their own rescue and neutralization scenarios. Avoiding a sector because a kid with a ghost ship is running a parallel op is still interference, All Might, Aizawa retorted. He watched as a group of advanced combat robots, designed to test the students' limits, swarmed Izuku's sector. Izuku simply pointed his rusted cutlass, and the undead crew poured forth, their intangible forms tearing through the robots as if they were made of smoke. The robots, built to withstand physical damage, simply glitched and short-circuited as the spectral forces passed through their circuits. Aizawa's mind, a master strategist's mind, whirred furiously. This wasn't combat, it was a ghost story made real. There was no defense against it. There was no countermeasure. Then, a new wave of shock hit him. He saw Lady Nagant, on the virtual deck of the Black Pearl, calmly taking a shot. A single, perfectly aimed bullet tore through the far end of the test zone, 100 meters away from Izuku, hitting a simulated villain's command center with flawless precision. The entire structure collapsed, neutralizing the threat and fulfilling Izuku's objective without any direct engagement. Aizawa's jaw, usually clamped shut in a perpetual scowl, hung slightly agape. Izuku wasn't fighting like a hero. He was fighting like a strategist, a specter, a pirate. He was using a crew, ranged support, and supernatural forces to complete an objective with maximum efficiency and minimum personal risk. It was everything he taught his students not to do, yet it was undeniably effective. He thought back to his student, Katsuki Bakugo, who was no doubt frothing with rage somewhere, trying to blow up his own simulated villains. He thought of Tenya Iida, who would be analyzing every move Izuku made with a bewildered mix of horror and tactical fascination. He thought of all the hero students, now faced with an enemy they couldn't even comprehend, let alone fight. Aizawa finally turned to Nezu in all might, his red eyes blazing with an exhausted fire. "This isn't about giving him a license, is it?" he said, his voice a low rumble. "This is about telling the world that this is the new reality. That quirkless, or at least non-quirk-based, heroes are now a part of the system. That the old rules, they don't apply anymore." He ran a hand through his hair, his mind utterly blown by the sheer audacity of the HPSC president. Izuku Midoriya, the boy who once wept in a back alley after being told his dreams were impossible, was now a sanctioned hero, a ghost captain, and a symbol of a paradigm shift no one was prepared for. And Aizawa, the man who was meant to erase the impossible, was left with nothing to do but watch it happen. The hero world was mobilized for the most critical rescue mission since Kamino Ward. The HPSC president had personally briefed Izuku and his crew, emphasizing the terrifying power of Kai Chisaki's overhaul quirk. His ability to disassemble and reassemble anything he touches made a direct assault a high-risk gamble for even the most powerful heroes. Izuku, however, and his spectral crew were the perfect countermeasure. His quirk relies entirely on physical contact, the president explained via holographic comm. He cannot overhaul what he cannot touch. Your crew's intangibility is our most crucial asset. The plan was a multi-front assault. The top heroes would storm the compound's main entrance, drawing the bulk of the villains' attention. Izuku and his crew, however, would take a different route. The Black Pearl, now a mobile and submersible command center, was brought to a secluded sewer entrance near the Shihasaikai compound. Inside the rusted, cavernous space, Izuku, Lady Nagant, and Inko stood ready. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and the distant sounds of hero combat. "All right, crew," Izuku said, his voice echoing slightly. "Our mission: locate and secure Eri. Minimize contact with villains where possible, but if engaged, overwhelm and disorient. Overhaul is the primary threat. Nagant, you're our eyes and our long-range support." Lady Nagant gave a crisp nod, her rifle arm already scanning the tunnel. "I'll handle any resistance that isn't a ghost." Izuku focused, and the undead captain and the rest of the crew materialized, their forms shimmering faintly in the dim light. They were more than just a crew now, they were a lifeline. "Go," Izuku commanded, pointing deeper into the sewer system. With a chilling, silent glide, the undead pirates surged forward, phasing through the solid concrete walls and rusted iron grates. They were scouting ahead, acting as a living map, their every movement a silent report to Izuku's mind. Their entry into the compound was a silent, unstoppable breach. Izuku, Lady Nagant, and Inko followed the path cleared by the spectral crew, passing through walls and past bewildered villains who could only watch as the ghosts of the Black Pearl materialized and dematerialized around them. They eventually reached the deepest part of the compound, where Izuku's compass vibrated frantically. There, in a laboratory filled with sterile equipment and a palpable sense of dread, stood Overhaul. He had a young girl, Eri, trembling by his side. "So," Overhaul said, his voice cold, "the heroes finally found me. But I see they sent an amateur." He gestured with a gloved hand towards Izuku. "And a former convict." Izuku drew his rusted cutlass, the blade glinting with grim resolve. "Release her, Chisaki." Overhaul chuckled, a cruel sound. He touched a piece of the wall, and it instantly rearranged into a jagged, lethal spike aimed at Izuku. But before it could even form, an undead pirate phased through the wall, disrupting the process and causing the spike to crumble into dust. What is this? Overhaul's voice lost its composure, a flicker of panic in his eyes. He tried to touch the skeleton, but his hand passed through it harmlessly. The undead captain struck him in the face, not with a physical blow, but with a horrifying, internal sensation that made him gasp. The advantage was overwhelming. While Overhaul was momentarily disoriented, Lady Nagant acted. She wasn't aiming to kill, but to incapacitate. Her rifle arm hummed, and a precise shot, a non-lethal one designed to sever tendons, flew through the air, hitting Overhaul's arm and causing him to cry out in pain and drop his guard. Now, Izuku yelled. The undead crew swarmed. There forms a terrifying vortex of silent fury around the villain. They held him in place, their intangible bodies preventing him from moving or using his quirk. Izuku moved to Eri, his face gentle despite the chaos. Eri, it's okay. We're here to help. He reached out a hand, and with a small, tearful whimper, she took it. With Eri safely in his arms, Izuku gave one final command. Crew, withdraw. The undead pirates, their work complete, dematerialized instantly. Overhaul, freed from their grasp, roared with fury, but it was too late. He was disoriented, wounded, and the heroes had just arrived to finish the job. Izuku, with Eri safely in his arms, looked down at the child, then at the grateful heroes. He had done it. He had faced down an impossible villain and saved a life, not with a quirk, but with a crew of phantoms and a pirate's conviction. The sterile air of the Hero Hospital hung heavy with the aftermath of the Shihasaikai raid. Sir Night-Eye, his body still mending from his grievous injuries, sat upright in his bed. He had been briefed on the mission's success, the capture of Overhaul, and the safe rescue of Eri. He should have felt relief, but as the details filtered in, a cold, simmering rage began to build within him. He had just received a confidential report from an HPSC liaison, detailing the unconventional acid used in the raid. The report described a ghost crew that infiltrated the compound, a captain who confronted Overhaul directly, and a vessel that provided an impossible point of entry. It was a thinly veiled account of what truly transpired. Sir Night-Eye's stoic demeanor cracked. His face, usually a mask of calm intellect, tightened into a mask of pure fury. This was not the unpredictable joy of saving a life, this was an egregious violation of order. He slammed a fist onto the hospital bed, the sound echoing in the quiet room. His bedside table rattled. Unacceptable, he growled, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that sent a tremor through the room. His sidekick, Bubble Girl, who had been quietly monitoring his vitals, flinched. Sir, what's wrong? The mission was a success, Overhaul is contained. The mission was an irresponsible gamble. Night-Eye snapped, cutting her off. The HPSC used a phantom force. A civilian commanding ghosts and a disgraced former hero. They bypassed all protocols, all safeguards, to introduce an unstable, unquantifiable variable into a critical operation. What if that boy had failed? What if his crew had turned on them? The entire operation, the lives of dozens of heroes, would have been compromised. His rage was not simply from a place of disappointment, but from a deep-seated philosophical disagreement with the HPSC's actions. He believed in a predictable future, a future where heroes operated with clear rules and quantifiable quirks. His own quirk, foresight, had taught him the importance of knowing what was to come and ensuring the path to victory was meticulously laid out. Izuku Midoriya and his ghost ship were the very antithesis of that belief. They were chaos incarnate. Night-Eye's gaze, usually so knowing, now burned with a furious conviction. That boy's power isn't a quirk, it's a fluke, a wild card. And the HPSC, in their arrogance, has sanctioned it. They have legitimized a vigilante with an army of specters, giving him a license to operate freely. This isn't progression, it's recklessness. It's leading hero society down a path of instability and peril. He looked at Bubble Girl, his eyes holding a dark prophecy only he could see. I foresaw a different future for that raid. A future where heroes like Mirio, like All Might, and I, followed a carefully constructed plan. I saw a difficult fight, a great cost, but ultimately, victory. Now, the future is muddled, tainted by this pirate's presence. The HPSC has introduced an unknown factor into the timeline, and the consequences will be dire. He slowly and painfully pushed himself to his feet, ignoring Bubble Girl's protests. Get me a meeting with the HPSC president. Now, I will not stand by and allow this to continue. The stability of our society is at stake, and I will not permit an institution to gamble with its future for the sake of an unconventional asset. The HPSC president's office was an austere chamber of steel and glass, its panoramic window offering a commanding view of the city below. The atmosphere was as cold and unyielding as its architecture. Sir Night-Eye, his expression a frigid mask of fury, strode into the room, his footsteps echoing on the polished floor. President, he began, foregoing all pleasantries, your actions were a grave dereliction of duty. You put the entire hero system at risk. The president, seated at her minimalist desk, didn't flinch. She gestured to a chair. Have a seat, Night-Eye. We can discuss this like professionals. This isn't a discussion. It's an accusation, Night-Eye retorted, remaining standing. You introduced an unquantifiable, unpredictable variable, a child with a ghost ship, into critical, high-stakes missions. You gave him a license to operate outside all established protocols, and you sanctioned the use of a former villain. This is a betrayal of everything heroes stand for. The president leaned forward, her expression unreadable. And yet, he succeeded where others failed. Stain is in containment, a feat no single hero achieved. All for One is dead, a threat you in All Might failed to permanently neutralize for years. Eri is safe. The results, Night-Eye, are undeniable. Your cherished protocols and principles nearly led to our ruin. Night-Eye's fist clenched. I foresaw a difficult, but successful outcome to the raid on the Shihasaikai. One that relied on teamwork and the proper application of powerful quirks, not on a child's bizarre supernatural abilities. You didn't just win a battle, you gambled with our future. And I chose to gamble on a new hand, the president shot back, her voice taking on a sharper edge. Your foresight is a powerful quirk, but it is not infallible. It operates within a known universe of quirks. Izuku Midoriya and his crew are an anomaly. They exist outside your predictions. They are the trump card, the force that can counter threats our society is not equipped to face. She stood, walking to the window and gazing out at the city. The world is changing, Night-Eye. Quirks are not the end-all, be-all of power. The line between hero and villain is blurring. The public's faith is fragile. I will use any tool at my disposal to ensure stability and order. And if that tool happens to be a ghost captain and his ship, then so be it. You're creating a monster, Night-Eye warned, his voice dangerously low. You're giving him autonomy, letting him operate without oversight. What happens when his unconventional methods go too far? When he decides his pirate's code is above the law, you've made him a weapon you can't control. The president finally turned to face him, a faint, condescending smile on her lips. I disagree. I've given him a purpose that aligns with his ideals. He has proven to be loyal, effective, and surprisingly principled. And, unlike you and your peers, he has an invaluable asset, an undead crew that cannot be swayed by promises or threats, only by his will. She walked back to her desk, her authority absolute. Captain Midoriya is a classified asset of the Hero Public Safety Commission. You have no jurisdiction, no authority, and no reason to interfere. Your job is to train the next generation of heroes. My job is to ensure they have a society to save. Our conversation is over. Night-Eye stood there for a long moment, the silence broken only by the hum of the air conditioning. He knew he was defeated, at least for now. The president had created a new kind of hero, a ghost in the machine, and she had no intention of letting anyone, especially a traditionalist like him, get in her way. He turned and walked out, his fury now solidified into a cold, determined resolve. The HPSC and its new asset were a threat to the future he had foreseen, and he would find a way to counter them, even if it meant moving outside the very rules he held so dear. The steel and glass office of the HSPC president had become an unexpectedly frequent destination for Izuku Midoriya. He stood before her desk, not in a state of defiance, but with a quiet resolve, his rusted cutlass in the Black Pearl's comms box left outside as a gesture of cooperation. The meeting wasn't about a mission, it was about the future. President, Izuku began, his voice steady, I've come to discuss two matters. The first concerns Eri. The president's expression remained impassive. The child rescued from overhaul. She is currently under close observation in a secure facility. What of her? She's a child, not a test subject, Izuku stated, his tone firm. She needs a family, a stable home, away from the prying eyes of heroes and villains alike. A place where she can learn what it means to be a person, not a quirk or a tool. He took a breath, his heart pounding. I want to adopt her. Bring her aboard the Black Pearl. The president's brow furrowed slightly, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. That is highly unorthodox. The Commission has protocols for subjects with volatile quirks. And the Commission's protocols led to her being held in a sterile room, a prisoner to her own power. The Black Pearl offers her something a hero school or a secure facility cannot. True isolation and the kind of care my mother, Inko, can provide. She would be safe, cared for, and she would learn that her quirk doesn't have to define her. She would be part of a family, not an asset. The president was silent for a long moment, considering the proposal from a purely strategic perspective. Izuku's unconventional life offered a unique solution. Keeping Eri away from a world that would inevitably fear and try to exploit her quirk was a pragmatic move. Aboard a ghost ship with a small, trusted crew, she would be completely off the grid. Agreed, the president said, her voice a clipped finality. The adoption will proceed. The terms will be classified, and her location will be known only to you, myself, and the highest levels of the Commission. You are now her legal guardian, Captain Midoriya. See that she is kept safe. Izuku felt a wave of relief and triumph wash over him. But he wasn't finished. There's one more thing, he said. I need to recruit 2 more members for my crew. La Brava and Gentle Criminal. The president's eyes narrowed. That's an entirely different matter. They are convicted criminals, Midoriya. Their sentences are active. They're also not malicious, Izuku countered, leaning forward. Gentle's crime was a misguided attempt at fame, not true villainy. He wanted to be recognized. And La Brava's quirk, love, is a powerful enhancer, but it's fueled by admiration, not hate. Her hacking skills are also invaluable. My missions are unconventional and often require non-lethal solutions. Gentle's elasticity quirk would be perfect for containment and mobility. La Brava's tech skills would be a massive asset for intel. They're a perfect fit for a crew that operates in the gray areas. He made his final, impassioned pitch. Their lives are wasted in a cell. Give them a chance at redemption. Give them a purpose that they can serve, not as heroes, but as members of my crew, a sanctioned part of the HPSC's operations. Their autonomy would be limited to our missions, and they would be under my command. It's a better outcome for them, and a better one for you. The president stared at him, a flicker of grudging admiration in her gaze. He wasn't just a pirate, he was a negotiator, a strategist who could see the hidden value in discarded pieces. Your audacity knows no bounds, Midoriya, she said, a small, humorless smile on her lips. Very well, I will arrange for their conditional release. Their terms of parole will be strict and will place them under your direct command. They will be your responsibility. Do not fail. Izuku felt a mix of relief and a new, heavy sense of responsibility settle over him. He had just become a father and a new captain to a crew that included a legendary sniper, a redeemed villain, a tech-savvy hacker, and a ghost army. The Black Pearl was no longer just a ship, it was a home for the outcasts, the misfits, and the lost. The cafe was small and unassuming, the kind of place where the soft clinking of teacups and the low murmur of conversation felt like a refuge. Izuku Midoriya sat in a secluded booth, wearing a simple dark jacket and jeans, a world away from the creaking timbers of the Black Pearl. Across from him was Kyoka Jiro, her expression a mix of curiosity and cautious intrigue. Their meeting hadn't been a pre-arranged date with an old classmate, it was a consequence of Izuku's new life. A few weeks prior, Izuku and his crew were dispatched by the HPSC to discreetly handle a villain threatening a high-profile music festival. It was a mission that required subtlety, and a villain with a sound-based quirk was a perfect target for Izuku's intangibility. Jiro's father, a renowned musician, was among the performers protected by Izuku's team. Jiro, being a hero student and a musician herself, had been backstage and witnessed a brief, bewildering flash of Izuku's spectral crew before the villain was neutralized. Her sharp hearing had picked up on the unsettling whispers of the undead pirates and the distinct clank of Izuku's rusted cutlass. Intrigued and a little disturbed, she had managed to find his contact information and requested to meet him. So, Jiro began, swirling the spoon in her latte. Her earphone jack quirk twitched subtly as she listened to the cafe's sonic landscape. "I've heard about you, Midoriya. The pirate hero. The ghost ship. It's the talk of the hero world." Izuku gave a nervous, self-deprecating smile. "It's a long story. And a bit of a weird one. I've got time," she said simply. "But honestly, I'm more curious about the guy behind it all." "Who are you? You're not from UA or any hero school. You just appeared." Izuku took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. He couldn't reveal the true nature of his work, or the specifics of his crew. "I was just a kid with a dream. And an opportunity came up to help people in a way no one else could. It's not a normal hero path, that's for sure. It's a lot of a responsibility." Jiro nodded, her gaze empathetic. "I get that. We all want to help. My whole class wants to be heroes. We train for it every day. But what you do, it feels different. More like a shadow war than a hero fight." Their conversation drifted from his new, secretive life to her public one as a hero student. She talked about her music, her family, and the rigors of her training. She confessed to being a huge fan of her father's work and the joy of creating music, a feeling of passion that Izuku deeply understood. "It's a different kind of power," she said, her voice softer now. "Music. It can't fight a villain, but it can move people. It can bring them together. I think that's why I want to be a hero, too." To protect that feeling, Izuku's chest tightened. Her words resonated with his own journey. He had been told he couldn't be a hero because he lacked a traditional quirk, but here he was, using an unconventional power to protect the things that mattered. As the afternoon sun streamed into the cafe, Jiro's gaze softened. "Midoriya," she said, her tone gentle, "I don't know who you were before all this happened, but from what I saw, and from what I hear, you're still a hero. That's all that matters, isn't it?" In that simple, quiet moment, surrounded by the mundane sounds of the cafe, Izuku felt something he hadn't felt in months, a sense of peace. He had a family on the sea, and maybe, just maybe, a real connection on land too. Years had passed, the relentless churn of hero society continuing its cycle of threats and triumphs. Izuku, now a young man with a weathered look that spoke of countless voyages and unseen battles, adjusted his tie as he stepped out of the sleek, unmarked HPSC vehicle. The setting sun cast long shadows across the quiet suburban street. He carried a worn leather briefcase, a far cry from the rusted cutlass of his youth. He walked up the path to a modest but cozy two-story house, a familiar warmth blooming in his chest. The front door swung open before he could reach it, revealing a beaming Eri, now a vibrant young girl with a bright smile that could chase away any storm. "Papa's home," she cried, launching herself into his arms. He hugged her tightly, the familiar scent of sunshine and childhood clinging to her. "Hey there, Squirt," Izuku chuckled, ruffling her hair. "How was school today?" Eri launched into a detailed account of her day, filled with stories of friends, lessons, and the occasional minor mishap with her still developing rewind quirk, which she was learning to control with patient guidance. Stepping into the hallway, Izuku was greeted by the comforting aroma of dinner cooking and the soft strumming of an electric guitar. Kyoka Jiro, her hair now a touch longer, a comfortable familiarity radiating from her, leaned against the doorframe to the living room, a warm smile gracing her lips. "Welcome back, Captain," she said, her voice a melodic blend of affection and playful teasing. Izuku grinned, crossing the hallway to pull her into a tender embrace. "Good to be back, Jiro." He pressed a kiss to her forehead, the years having deepened their connection into a quiet, unwavering love. Their life wasn't conventional. Izuku still operated under the HPSC, the Black Pearl, now a legendary phantom vessel that appeared and disappeared as needed, handling threats that the mainstream hero world couldn't touch. Eri knew her papa worked a special, important job, one that often took him away but always brought him back. Jiro, a successful pro-hero in her own right, balanced her public life with their private harbor. Later, as they sat down to dinner, Inko, now a cherished grandmother figure, often joining them, the conversation flowed easily. Eri chattered about her day, Jiro discussed a recent rescue mission, and Izuku shared a few carefully sanitized anecdotes from his latest assignment, careful to keep the specifics of his crew and the true nature of his work veiled. After dinner, Eri curled up on the sofa, her head resting on Izuku's lap as Jiro played a soft melody on her guitar. The warm glow of the fireplace filled the room, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The weight of the world, the secrets he carried, the lingering echoes of spectral battles, all seemed to fade in the simple, profound joy of being home. The Black Pearl might always call to him, the thrill of the open sea and the responsibility to his unique crew a constant presence. But here, in this quiet house, surrounded by the love of his wife and daughter, Izuku had found his true anchor, his most precious treasure. The unconventional hero had found his harbor. The end. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and now we will see you in the next video.